The elevator jolted once. Kael barely noticed it. His eyes were half-lidded, phone in hand, watching a silent video he wasn't even paying attention to. He hadn't slept the night before. He didn't remember why. Probably didn't matter. Another jolt. Sharper this time. Then nothing. No motion. No sound. Kael blinked and looked up. The lights above flickered once, then dimmed. No hum from the elevator motor. No background noise. Just silence. He pressed the emergency button. No beep. No click. Nothing. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Not panic. Something colder. Like a realization was creeping up on him from the back of his mind. And then, everything dropped. Weightlessness struck. No sound. No scream. No impact. Just nothing. Then he opened his eyes. At least, it felt like he did. There was no darkness. No light. Just awareness floating in a place that had no shape. A void. Empty and endless. "Where am I?" he whispered. His voice echoed through the silence. Yet there was no air. No vibration. Just the idea of sound. Then chimes. Gentle and glass-like. A glowing message appeared in front of him, floating in the nothingness. "You have been assigned a skill. System hijack. Copy the system interface of any living being. Limited to one target at a time. Side effects unknown." That was it. No stats. No class. No attributes. Just a single line. Another panel appeared beneath it. Initializing transfer. Warning. No system anchor detected. Soul form unstable. Proceeding anyway. A pulse of light shimmered, forming the outline of a door. Not made of wood or metal, but of light woven into circuitry. Faint pulses of blue and black energy rippled through it. Kael reached out. The moment his hand touched the light, the void shattered like glass. His lungs burned. Air rushed in like ice. He choked, rolled over, and spat out a mouthful of dirt. Trees towered over him. Thin, blackened trees with no leaves. The forest was dead. Still. Silent. He pushed himself upright, trembling. Nearby, a man's corpse lay against a mossy log. His armor was torn. A sword rested loosely in his hand. A faint glow shimmered above him. Torin Delvin, warrior, level 3. Status, terminated. System decay, 73%. Kael stared at the floating text. It hung in the air, like part of reality itself. He reached toward it, slowly. Nothing happened. He sat back, breathing heavily. "System panel," he said. A faint screen flickered before his eyes. Empty. No level. No stats. Just one line. Skill, system hijack. That was all. Something stirred behind him. He turned sharply. An older man limped out from the trees, bleeding heavily from his side. His eyes were dull, tired. He looked at Kael and gave a faint smile. "You don't have a class." Kael opened his mouth, but no words came. The man chuckled once, dry and weak. Lucky or cursed. Then he collapsed and didn't move again. Kael dragged both bodies into a half-collapsed lodge nearby. Broken wood. Rotten walls. But enough to keep the cold out. He sat beside a dead hearth, eyes on the flickering interface that still hovered over the fallen warrior. A prompt appeared. Hijack system. Warrior, level 3. Replacing current structure. Side effects possible. Kael stared. He had nothing. No power. No direction. If this was his only way forward, do it. Pain erupted through his body. Bones snapped. Muscles seized. Nerves screamed. He doubled over, vision white with agony. Then came the memories. Not his. A battlefield. A cry. A name shouted into the wind. Someone else's story forced itself into his soul. When it stopped, he collapsed to the floor, gasping. A soft chime echoed. System hijack successful. New class. Warrior, level 3. Weapon proficiency. Basic swords, passive. Adrenaline spike, active. Combat reflex, passive. His breath steadied. His arms felt stronger. But something was wrong. It wasn't just a system. It came with pieces of the man himself. He could feel Torin's instincts humming under his skin. Outside, something howled. Kael took the sword from the warrior's corpse. Its edge was dull. The grip, worn. Another howl. He stepped out of the lodge and saw them. 3 creatures. Wolfen. Monstrous hybrids of wolves and something corrupted. Their fur was pale, their eyes glowing with red lines that pulsed like veins of fire. They circled him. Kael's grip tightened. One lunged. Adrenaline spike activated. The world slowed. He sidestepped barely. The sword moved like it knew what to do. Steel met flesh. The wolfen howled. Another came from his side. Claws scraped his shoulder. Blood sprayed. He gritted his teeth and swung wildly, slashing the beast across the ribs. Pain flared. Blood ran. But he was still on his feet. System notification. Damage threshold surpassed. Bonus EXP applied. One beast lunged for his throat. Kael raised the blade and drove it through the creature's chest. The body fell. Twitched. Stilled. Breath heaving. Kael stood among the corpses. His first battle. His first stolen victory. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he dug a grave behind the lodge and marked it with a broken branch. Torin Delvin. He stared at the name for a long time. Then whispered, "I'll carry your path. Until I find my own." The wind whispered through the trees. And then, the system flickered. Second hijack available in 11 days. System degradation, 3%. Kael looked at the glowing words. And for the first time since he arrived in this world, he was afraid. Morning broke slowly. A pale, colorless light filtered through the dead trees, casting long shadows across the ruined hunting lodge. The battle from the night before felt like a half-remembered dream. Kael's arm still ached. His shoulder throbbed from the wolfen's claws. But he was alive. Barely. He sat on the lodge steps, watching mist curl between the trunks. The sword rested across his lap, cleaned and rewrapped with strips from the fallen man's cloak. The weapon felt like it belonged to someone else. Because it did. Kael opened his status panel. The same borrowed words glowed in the air. Warrior, level 3. Weapon proficiency, basic swords. Adrenaline spike. Combat reflex. Skill, system hijack. Next hijack, 10 days. System degradation, 3%. It was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question that had been crawling in the back of his mind since he woke up in this world. Who am I now? He waited for an answer. None came. Not from the system. Not from the fragments of Torin's life that still flickered behind his thoughts. Just silence. Kael stood, sheathed the sword, and set out. He needed food, information, shelter, and answers. Especially answers. He followed a dirt trail through the woods, faint, overgrown, and littered with shattered carts and rusted tools. Something bad had swept through here. Something violent, but not recent. By midday, smoke curled in the distance. A campfire. He crouched low and approached quietly, hiding behind a thick tree trunk. In the clearing ahead, a young woman sat beside a fire. Light armor. Simple cloak. She was eating from a small pot and muttering under her breath, annoyed at something. She hadn't noticed him yet. Kael's instincts whispered, Torin's instincts, that he should move silently around, stay downwind, watch for hidden weapons. But his own thought said something else. He was tired of hiding. He stepped out of the trees and raised one hand. "I'm not here to fight." The girl jolted to her feet, sword half drawn, eyes sharp. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Where's your badge?" Kael hesitated. "I don't have one." She frowned. "You're not with the guild?" "No." Her gaze narrowed. "What class are you?" Another pause. Kael looked her in the eye. "Warrior. Level 3. She relaxed slightly, but didn't lower her weapon. "You don't look like a warrior. Where's your armor?" "Your anchor." "My what?" "Your system anchor." She stared at him like he just admitted to breathing underwater. "You seriously don't know?" He shook his head. "I'm new to all of this." That seemed to soften her expression. Just a little. She stepped back and slowly sheathed her blade. "Fine. Sit down. Eat. But if you lie to me, we're going to have a problem." Kael sat cautiously across from her. The fire crackled between them. She handed him a bit of hard bread and a slice of dried fruit. It wasn't much, but it tasted better than anything he'd had since waking up. "I'm Lyra," she said after a moment. "Scout for the South Branch Guild. This area is supposed to be under quarantine." Kael blinked. "What?" She pointed behind her. "Wolfen spread. System corruption. Happens when dungeons overflow and no one clears them in time. Once the core fragments, the corruption leaks into the land. Mutates wildlife. Twists people." Kael thought of the bees from last night. The strange glow in their veins. The madness in their eyes. Lyra studied him for a moment. "You really didn't know any of this." "I told you. I'm new." She sighed and leaned back against a log. You said you're a warrior. Then where's your anchor? I don't have one, he said again. This time, her eyes widened. That's not possible. Every class links to one. It's how the system holds you together. Otherwise your mind and your soul start drifting. Kael's heart skipped. Drifting. Was that why he saw those flashes? Felt other thoughts creeping in? Lyra was still talking. Anchors usually show up around level 1 or 2. They can be weapons, relics, tattoos, companions, anything that stabilizes your path. Without it, the system starts pulling pieces of you in directions you can't control. Kael said nothing, because deep down, he already knew. What happens if someone doesn't get one? They degrade. Some go mad. Others collapse. I met a guy once who borrowed another class using an illegal device. Lost himself in a week. Kael looked at his interface. System degradation, 3%. A low number, but it was rising. Lyra tossed a twig into the fire. Anyway, I've got orders to scout the ruins up north. You're welcome to tag along. The guild might take you in. Wouldn't they need to see my system? They'll scan you at the gate. If you're lying, they'll throw you out. Or worse. Kael hesitated. He needed to get inside. Needed answers. But if someone scanned his system and saw the hijack skill, would they see him as a threat? Lyra looked at him. You coming? He stood. Nodded. They moved quietly through the trees. Lyra was fast, efficient, used to moving unseen. Kael followed as best he could, letting his borrowed instincts guide him. She didn't talk much after that. Just pointed out dangers. A tripwire. A broken shrine. A collapsed watchtower. By sundown, they reached a ridge overlooking a walled town. Cracked stone. Guard towers. Heavy steel gates. Kael's breath caught. This was it. His first step into the world. Lyra looked at him. You nervous? He nodded. Good, she said. That means you're still sane. They descended toward the gates. Kael's interface flickered once more. Next hijack. 9 days. System degradation. 4%. He clenched his fists. He had 9 days to find a solution. Or lose himself completely. And somewhere, deep in his mind, a voice that wasn't his own whispered a name. A name he didn't know, but soon would. The walls of South Branch rose higher the closer they came. From a distance, the town had looked modest. Stone towers, rusted gates, and patches of moss eating through the mortar. But up close, Kael could see the reinforcements. Steel braces, magical sigils carved into the stone, defensive turrets mounted with glowing crystals. Lyra walked ahead of him without a word, pulling up a worn leather badge from around her neck as they approached the gate. 2 armored guards stepped forward. One human, one scaled, part reptile maybe. Both carried spears tipped with silver. Lyra flashed the badge. South Branch Scout, returning from Northern Patrol. One guest. Class declared. Warrior, level 3. The guards exchanged a look. Then one gestured toward the device beside the gate. A crystalline sphere mounted in a floating frame of bronze. It pulsed with soft blue light. Standard verification, the reptilian guard said. Your companion goes first. Kael swallowed. This was it. If the scan saw what he really was, if it detected the system hijack skill, everything could fall apart. He stepped toward the orb. It floated to eye level and began to hum. Gentle, like wind through glass. The blue light turned white. A screen appeared. Name, Kael. Class, Warrior. Level, 3. Anchor, not detected. Skill integrity, stable. Status, no threat detected. The guards didn't even blink. The orb dimmed. One waved him through. Unanchored warrior. Huh. The human muttered. You should report to classification. They'll want to fix that before you go unstable. Kael gave a quick nod and followed Lyra inside. Heart pounding. They hadn't seen it. Somehow, the scan accepted the stolen system. Or the hijack skill was buried deep enough that it didn't register. Either way, he was in. The town was alive in a way the forest had never been. Stone streets. Crowds of travelers. Vendors shouting over each other from stalls lined with glowing herbs, enchanted tools, and dried meats wrapped in enchanted paper. Guards in matching armor passed by with trained eyes. Class badges sparkled on collars and belts, each one marked with a color and rank. Lyra walked with confidence, weaving through the noise like she belonged. Kael followed, trying not to stare too long at anything. They passed a group of mages in black and gold robes, each with floating books orbiting their shoulders. A pair of beastfolk merchants bartered with a man in full armor, his interface flashing above his head for all to see. Ranger, level 27. Kael felt like he'd wandered into a different world, and in a way he had. Lyra finally stopped outside a wide stone building near the town center. A polished sign above the door read, South Branch, Classification Hall. She turned to him. This is where I leave you. Inside, they'll register your presence and give you a temporary guild token. You'll need that to stay here legally. Kael nodded. Thanks. She shrugged. Don't thank me yet. If they don't like your anchor situation, they might recommend a wipe. His blood ran cold. And what? System wipe. Reset to default. Class loss. Memory erosion. Not common, but not unheard of for anomalies. She started to walk away, then paused. Look, you seem decent. Don't lie to them. But don't tell them everything either. Just be smart. Kael watched her go, then pushed open the door. Inside, the classification hall smelled of parchment, magic ink, and something metallic. Rows of desks lined the front, each manned by a clerk in a slate blue uniform. Crystals embedded in the ceiling gave off soft, even light. He stepped forward. A young woman with copper hair and sharp glasses looked up from her scrollwork. Class registration. He nodded. She slid over a small brass plate shaped like a coin. Place your hand here. The device will confirm system sync and verify your current status. Kael hesitated, then placed his palm on the plate. It was cold at first, then it burned, just for a second, like a pinprick behind his eyes. The clerk didn't react. A chime rang out. Warrior. Unanchored. Level 3. System stable. She looked at him. Unanchored warriors are rare. You'll need to meet with an anchor officer for evaluation. Kael forced a small smile. Of course. She handed him a small silver disc etched with a guild crest. This is your temporary token. You'll be allowed within public quarters of South Branch for 7 days. After that, if your anchor remains undefined, your status will be reviewed. He accepted it with a nod. As he turned to leave, the clerk's voice stopped him. One more thing. There was a note attached to your scan. Kael turned. A note. She pulled up a second panel, visible only to her, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she read it. Strange. Says you're flagged for observational clearance. What does that mean? She shook her head. Not sure. Could be a formality. Could mean someone higher up took interest. Kael's skin prickled. He thanked her and left. The air outside felt colder. He walked aimlessly, the streets now a blur of color and motion. Laughter, haggling, the clatter of boots. But his thoughts were elsewhere. Someone had seen him. Maybe not what he truly was, but enough to leave a flag on his record. He passed a blacksmith shop. The scent of heated iron was sharp. A bakery. Children laughing near a fountain. All of it, so full of life. But Kael felt the opposite. Every step he took in this world pulled him further from who he'd once been. He sat beneath an empty archway and opened his interface. Warrior, level 3. Adrenaline spike. Combat reflex. Weapon proficiency. Basic swords. Skill, system hijack. Next hijack. 8 days. System degradation. 5%. He stared at that last line for a long time. 5%. And rising. He needed answers. Fast. And in that moment, his vision flickered. For just a breath, the world around him blurred. And a voice echoed inside his mind. Low. Calm. Unfamiliar. So you're the one who inherited the last skill. Kael spun, heart hammering. But there was no one there. Just wind. And the faint glow of the system. The voice still echoed in Kael's mind. So you're the one who inherited the last skill. He stood slowly, eyes scanning the narrow stone alley where he'd stopped to rest. It was empty. No footsteps. No shadows. Just flickering lanterns and the sound of distant street music. But the voice hadn't come from outside. It had been inside him. As clear as thought, but not his own. Kael opened his system panel. Nothing new. System hijack. Warrior. No warnings. No messages. But the words lingered. He inherited it. That meant someone else had it before. Someone else had used this skill. And survived. At least long enough to leave a mark. He turned back toward the main road, but a figure was already waiting there. A man. Hooded. Leaning against the alley wall as if he'd been standing there the whole time. Kael froze. The man spoke without lifting his head. You heard it, didn't you? The echo. Kael's hand shifted toward the hilt of his sword. Who are you? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, He stepped forward. The hood slipped back just enough to reveal dark eyes, sharp and tired, like they'd seen too much of the world. The first time you hijack, it leaves a crack, he said. A gap. That's how the voices start. Kael narrowed his eyes. You know about my skill. The man nodded once. I had it before you. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Kael whispered, You're lying. I wish I was. The man turned away and began walking deeper into the alley. Come if you want the truth, he said. Or stay here and let the system burn you alive from the inside. Kael hesitated, then followed. They walked in silence through side streets and shadowed paths, past the outer walls, through an old maintenance tunnel that smelled of dust and rusted magic. Eventually, they reached an underground chamber lit by dim blue stones embedded in the walls. Empty shelves, dusty chairs, faded banners from a guild that no longer existed. The man sat down on a stone bench and looked at Kael. The skill you carry doesn't belong to this world, he said. It's older than the current system, older than the first guilds. It was locked away because it broke the rules that keep this reality together. Kael stared at him. Then how did I get it? That? I don't know. The man folded his hands. But I do know what happens if you keep using it without control. Kael sat across from him. The degradation. The man nodded. Every time you hijack, the system you take leaves a scar. Memories. Traits. Pieces of the person they once were. Without an anchor, those fragments don't fade. They build, layer over layer. And eventually, you disappear. Replaced. Kael swallowed hard. The man reached into his cloak and pulled out something small. A medallion, carved from obsidian and etched with the same symbol Kael had seen once in the interface. A spiraled eye, fractured down the middle. This was left by the last person before me, he said. I've had it for years. It doesn't do anything, but maybe for you it will. Kael took the medallion. It was heavier than it looked. Cold. And the moment his fingers closed around it, a pulse echoed through his system panel. System notification. Fragment identified. Echo sync. 1%. Access locked. Kael's breath caught. What is it? An echo anchor, the man said. A piece of someone who came before. Strong enough, and it might keep you together, but only for a while. Kael stared down at the medallion. This thing, it might save me. It might, the man said. Or it might show you things you're not ready to see. Kael closed his hand around it anyway. He didn't have the luxury of time. How long did you last? He asked. The man looked away. 2 years. Then I gave it up. Forced the system to purge itself before I lost everything. You can do that. Not anymore. They've changed the rules. Kael narrowed his eyes. Who? The man stood, slowly. The ones who control the system. The core servers. The enforcers. The architects. Whatever name they go by now, they don't like variables. And you, Kael, are the biggest variable this world has seen in a long time. Kael stood too, the weight of that name echoing in his chest. So what do I do? The man looked at him. Don't trust anyone. Not the guild. Not the watch. Especially not the analysts. Learn what you can. Find real anchors. Ones that bond with who you are, not who you've borrowed. And if someone ever offers you a class crystal, run. He turned to leave. Wait, Kael said. What's your name? The man paused in the doorway. I gave it up. With the system I burned. And then he was gone. Kael stood alone in the dim light, the medallion still warm in his hand. He opened his interface again. Warrior, level 3. Adrenaline spike. Combat reflex. Weapon proficiency. Basic swords. Skill, system hijack. Echo sync. 1%. Next hijack, 7 days. System degradation, 6%. He took a breath. The path ahead was darker than he'd thought. But now, at least he wasn't walking it blind. The medallion hung from Kael's neck like a weight made of silence. It didn't glow, didn't vibrate, didn't whisper secrets in his ear. But ever since he left the chamber beneath South Branch, his thoughts had started feeling heavier, not slower, just fuller. Stray memories surfaced when he looked at a sword or heard a certain tone in someone's voice. Flashes that weren't his. A battlefield at dusk. A hand reaching out through flames. The feel of steel driving in a bone, followed by regret sharp enough to bleed. He knew they weren't his memories. And yet, they felt like they belonged. The echo anchor was working, or it was unraveling him. Either way, he had 7 days before his next hijack window opened. 7 days to find something worth copying, or of something worth becoming. For now, he needed focus. Kael moved through South Branch's streets with care. He avoided the guild halls, dodged the market crowds, and stayed clear of the armored men wearing blue and gold cloaks. The ones Lyra had quietly called analysts. System investigators. Data trackers. Those who didn't wield weapons, but still made people disappear. His silver token let him enter the outer layers of the city's training quarter, a ring of old stone platforms and sparring pits watched over by bored guards and curious onlookers. No badges were required here, just discipline and blood. Kael stepped into an empty circle, a practice blade in his hand, wooden, weighted like iron. His real sword was hidden under his cloak. No point drawing attention. He inhaled, then moved. He let the warrior system guide him. Torin's instincts, sharp, practiced, proud, took the lead. His feet turned without conscious thought. The blade swept in smooth arcs. Stances locked naturally. Muscle memory, not his. By the third repetition, something shifted. A new motion slid into place, one he hadn't learned. A horizontal cut followed by a rising block and a downward kick. Too fluid to be accidental. His hand jerked back. That wasn't from Torin. That was new. He checked his system panel. Warrior, level 3. Adrenaline spike. Combat reflex. Weapon proficiency. Basic swords. Skill, system hijack. Echo sync, for percent. Next hijack, 6 days. System degradation, 7%. The echo sync was rising, and with it, someone else's combat style. Kael left the arena before anyone could watch too closely. He wandered back through the southern walkways, where the city sloped down into older, quieter streets. Fewer guards, more silence, just the wind between buildings that had lost their names long ago. That was where he found the corpse. It lay half-hidden in the corner of an abandoned shrine, an alley temple with crumbling pillars and weather-worn symbols. The body was dressed in pale robes marked with a silver thread pattern that pulsed faintly in the dark. No blood, no signs of violence, just empty eyes staring upward. Above the body floated a ghostly interface. Classified class, redacted, level, status deceased. System decay, 99%. Anchor type, null core. Warning, fragment detected. Kael froze. This wasn't a normal class. No level, no name. Even the interface was corrupted, its text flickered and dragged, as if it were resisting being seen. And yet, above it all, a prompt appeared. Familiar. System hijack available. Target, unknown system type. Risk level, critical. Proceed? He stared. This was his chance. A rare class. Maybe one of the Echo Bearers. Maybe a broken experiment. Whatever it was, it didn't follow the rules. Exactly like him. He reached forward. But before his hand touched the interface, a voice rang out behind him. Step back. Kael turned instantly. A woman stood at the alley's edge, armor black and gold, cloak trimmed with burning silver threads. A badge pulsed on her chest, marked with an emblem he hadn't seen before, an eye made of 3 rings. She was an analyst, but not like the others. Her presence made the air feel heavier, like the system itself acknowledged her. Kael didn't move. The woman approached slowly, calm, not aggressive, her eyes fixed on the body. You're lucky, she said. Another 2 seconds, and you'd be listed as a class contaminant. He kept his voice steady. I didn't know what it was. You still don't, she said, kneeling beside the body. A small device floated from her gauntlet, scanning the air above the corpse. This one had a null core. Unstable, rejected by the system multiple times. Carried 4 classes over his lifetime. None of them stuck. Kael swallowed. Ow. Hijack type traits. Rare. Dangerous. No known origin. But they leave a trail. She glanced at him. Not accusing. Not hostile. But sharp. Name. He held up his silver token. Kael. Registered. She scanned it once, then nodded. You're new. Low level. Temporary. No trace flags. You didn't see anything. Kael hesitated. What was his class? She stood. If you're smart, you'll stop asking questions like that. Then why didn't you report me? She studied him. Then said, because I've seen your kind before. Once. Years ago. Kael's breath caught. Their system didn't warn them either, she continued. Until it was too late. She turned to leave. Wait, Kael said. What happened to them? The analyst paused at the alley mouth. They vanished. But the damage they caused didn't. And then she was gone. Kael stood there, the corrupted system still pulsing softly in the air above the corpse. He reached for it again, but the prompt was gone. Too late. The interface dissolved into light, swallowed by the wind. He opened his system panel. Echo sync, 6%. Next hijack, 6 days. System degradation, 9%. He stared at the numbers, then down his hand. It was shaking. Kael didn't return to the city center that night. Instead, he wandered the outer district, back alleys, overgrown rooftops, and unused stairways carved into the stone walls that wrapped around South Branch like ancient armor. He didn't want to be seen, didn't want questions, not when his hands were still trembling. The memory hadn't stopped. It wasn't a thought, or a feeling, or even a vision. It was an experience, a full moment of life that he had never lived. He closed his eyes, and it played again. A tower burning in the distance. Smoke rising against a red sky. Metal grinding against metal. The weight of armor, hot against his skin. A woman's voice, soft but desperate. Don't make me choose. And then silence. Followed by a sharp sound, like a blade being drawn. Followed by nothing. Kael gripped the railing of an old walkway and stared out over the edge of the city. The cliff below dropped into a dark forest, barely touched by moonlight. He wasn't alone in his head anymore. That much was obvious. The echo sync wasn't just data, it was a doorway. One memory at a time, someone else's soul was bleeding into his own, and it wasn't slowing down. He opened his panel again. Warrior, level 3. Adrenaline spike. Combat reflex. Weapon proficiency, basic swords. Skill, system hijack. Echo sync, 8%. Next hijack, 5 days. System degradation, 10%. He flinched. Double digits. He closed the interface and exhaled slowly. 5 days, he whispered. 5 days to find something clean, or something real. Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned fast, hand brushing the hilt of his sword. But it wasn't a guard. It was a boy, maybe 15, lean, messy black hair. He wore a messenger's vest, but his eyes weren't casual. They were studying Kael, calculating. The boy raised a hand. Easy, not here to fight. Kael didn't relax. Then what are you here for? Message, the boy said, from someone who watches people like you. Kael frowned. I don't have a guild. Doesn't matter. Some eyes don't need badges. He handed Kael a folded scrap of parchment, then turned and vanished down the stairs before Kael could say another word. Kael hesitated, then opened it. No name, no seal, just 6 words, written in clean, elegant script. You're not the only one left. He read it again, and again, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his belt. There were others, not just the man in the ruins, not just the analyst's warning. There were still more out there, alive, watching, maybe even surviving the same decay he was facing. But where? He needed more information. The next morning, Kael went to the archive wing, an old spire near the edge of South Branch, where guild records, monster logs, and ancient class files were stored. Few people came here anymore. Most relied on system-linked directories or analyst briefings. Kael walked past rows of shelves filled with cracked tomes and enchanted books, whispering softly to themselves. An old woman sat at a desk near the back, half asleep with her face in a ledger. She glanced up as he approached. Class registry. Research, he said. Historical. She grunted. Subject. He hesitated. System anomalies. Classes that weren't stable. Her eyes sharpened slightly. Null anchors. Class drift. Echo bleed. He blinked. You know those terms? She chuckled. Boy, I've worked here since before the 3rd server recalibration. I know things most guild masters pretend don't exist. Kael leaned forward. Have you ever heard of a skill that lets you copy someone's system? Her voice lowered. I've heard whispers. Never official records. They call a legend. A myth. But we both know better than that, don't we? Kael didn't respond. She stood, surprisingly quick for her age, and motioned him to follow. Down a back hall, through a sealed door with no visible lock. Just a small sigil on the floor that pulsed once as they passed. She led him to a table with a single book on it. Black leather. No title. She opened it to a marked page. The text was dense. Old formatting. No glowing panels. No automatic summaries. But there, in faded ink, were the words. Echo types. Cases of class inheritance from lost souls. Kael read in silence. They weren't just rumors. In the past, there had been 4 recorded cases of echo-type users. Each one began with an unstable system. Each one could absorb traits from others through battle, death, or proximity. None survived past level 40. 2 went mad. 1 disappeared. 1 was executed. The woman tapped the page. They called it a curse. But others thought it was evolution. A sign the system was trying to change, and the world rejected it. Kael looked at her. Did they ever find a way to stop the degradation? No, she said softly, but they did find ways to slow it. She handed him a torn page from a different book. It was a diagram, lines forming around a core system, anchored by something labeled Personal Identity Catalyst. Kael stared. What is it? A self-forged anchor, she said. Not inherited, not granted, not crafted. It's made by defining yourself so clearly that even the system can't overwrite it. Kael didn't speak for a long time. When he left the archive wing, the sun was starting to fall behind the towers. He walked to a quiet rooftop and sat with his knees drawn up, staring at the distant horizon. The voice came again, faint, like wind through his thoughts. Don't lose her. It wasn't his voice, but the sorrow it carried made his chest ache. He opened his system panel. Warrior, level 3. Echo sync, 11%. Next hijack, 5 days. System degradation, 12%. Kael clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to break. He wasn't going to fade into fragments. He was going to forge something that couldn't be copied. His own system, his own self, no matter what the world tried to take. It rained for 2 days straight. Not a storm, just steady, gray drizzle that soaked the stones of South Branch and filled the air with a constant, gentle hush. The city slowed. Merchants packed early. Sparring pits emptied. The watch patrols moved quieter. Kael welcomed the quiet. He stayed in the far end of the outer ring, renting a crumbling room above a shuttered tavern. No one asked questions there. No one looked twice. The rain drowned footsteps, and the city's eyes drifted elsewhere. But Kael wasn't resting. He was preparing. He sat cross-legged on the warped wooden floor, soaked cloak hanging from a peg, sword within arm's reach. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady, and in his hands, the black medallion pulsed softly. Echo anchor, fragment sync, 11%. Next hijack, 4 days. System degradation, 14%. The number was climbing faster now. Too fast. He couldn't wait for another clean system. He had to make one. Not a class. Not an interface. An identity. He opened his status manually. Without speaking, without prompting. The interface responded slower now. Flickering, as if uncertain who it was responding to. Kael focused on one word. Anchor. A line that remained empty every time he checked. He dug into his thoughts. Into who he'd been before the elevator. Before the void. Before Torin's sword and the memories that weren't his. Who was he? Just a name? Just a vessel for other people's powers? He thought back. To the tiny apartment. The quiet life. The mornings where no one waited. The hours that passed without purpose. He hadn't been strong. But he wanted to be. He remembered the feeling, just before the elevator dropped. The single, bitter thought. I don't want to disappear without meaning. And now here he was. Disappearing again. But slower. One echo at a time. No. He gritted his teeth. Focused harder. What made him him? Not the sword. Not the stolen skills. Not the strange memories bleeding through. What had he chosen? Kael's hands tightened around the medallion. I choose to remember. He said it aloud. The words rang through the small room, clear and firm. I choose to remember who I am, even if no one else ever knew. Even if the system doesn't care. A pulse rippled through his interface. For the first time, something moved. Anchor slot. Initializing. Scanning. Fragment conflict detected. System identity. Undefined. Pain shot through his temples. Flashes of battle. A woman's voice. Smoke. Screams. Not his. But he didn't push them away. He braced himself and stood with them. The fragments surged. Images, instincts, words, but he held on to the core. Not the borrowed ones. His. I am Kael. I am still Kael. His heart pounded. The system flickered again. Anchor slot. Manual override in progress. Stability check failed. Retrying. He exhaled, sweat on his brow. Then the door to the room creaked open. He turned, expecting the landlord. It wasn't. Lyra stepped into the room, dripping wet, cloak plastered to her armor. She looked around once, then shut the door behind her. How long have you been doing this? Kael wiped his forehead. Doing what? Fighting your own system, like it's a wild beast. He gave a weak smile. Couple hours. She walked to the window, pushed it closed, then turned back. I've been hearing things, she said. About a corpse found with a corrupted system. About a man with no anchor. About a strange flicker in the analyst records. Kael's smile faded. And I've been watching, Lyra said softly. Since we met. What? Because I had a brother who cracked like that. No anchor. His class started changing every time he leveled. One day, he woke up thinking he was someone else. Said our parents died in a war that never happened. She folded her arms. Her eyes weren't angry, just tired. 3 days later, the system erased him. Kael didn't speak. Lyra knelt in front of him, pulled something from her pocket. A small charm. Simple, metal-bound with a red stone at the center. She held it out. This was his anchor. The only thing he kept from his real life. It's not active anymore, but maybe it'll help. Kael took it. The moment it touched his skin, something clicked. Not a new memory. Not a fragment. Just a quiet moment of understanding. Not all anchors were born from power. Some were born from grief. And some from choice. He looked at Lyra. Thank you. She stood again. Don't thank me yet. If this doesn't work, I'm dragging you to the enforcers myself. Kael chuckled. Fair. She walked to the door. Paused. I think you're worth saving, she said. But I also think you're the kind of person who'll try to carry every broken piece alone. She glanced over her shoulder. Don't. And then she was gone. Kael stared at the closed door, then back at the charm in his hand. He placed it beside the medallion, closed his eyes, and whispered again. I choose to remember. The system pulsed. Anchor slot, recalibrating. Identity signature, accepted. Temporary anchor stabilized. He collapsed backward, breathing hard, but smiling. Echo sync, 12%. Next hijack, 4 days. System degradation, 13%. Anchor, soul linked unbound. He wasn't fixed. Not yet. But now, he had something to hold on to. The sun returned on the 3rd day. After 2 full days of rain and silence, the skies cleared, and South Branch stirred to life once more. Street vendors reopened their stalls. Sparring rings filled with clashing blades and shouting mentors. Even the guild watch moved faster, their boots echoing across the stone roads. But Kael didn't stay in the city. Not that day. He left through the southern gate before sunrise, cloaked and hooded, with a sword on his back and Lyra's old charm hanging from his neck. His temporary token allowed for limited travel outside the perimeter, as long as he didn't cross into any flagged zones. He had no intention of going that far. But there was a place he'd heard about. Something whispered in the archive wing. A rumor, buried between system logs and half-sealed reports. A dungeon without a core. Most dungeons were living structures, system-forged anomalies that fed on ambient magic, producing monsters, traps, and rewards to test those who entered. At the center of every dungeon was a core, the heart of the structure, the anchor that made it stable. Without a core, a dungeon should collapse. This one hadn't. It was located in a dead grove south of South Branch, hidden behind an old hunting trail, abandoned after an incident with a scout team 3 years ago. No survivors, no explanation, and worst of all, no recorded system activity. Kael found the trail by midday. Overgrown, forgotten. As he moved deeper, the forest grew quiet again. Not unnatural, just expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Finally, he reached the clearing. A crumbled stone doorway jutted out of the earth like the bones of a long-dead beast. Runes lined the archway, faded but still pulsing faintly, as if remembering what they were made for. Kael stood at the edge and opened his interface. Warrior, level 3. Anchor, soul-linked unbound. Skill, system hijack. Next hijack, 3 days. Echo sync, 13%. System degradation, 14%. No warnings. No dungeon interface. No alert from the guild net. Just silence. He stepped inside. The moment his boot crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped. Not by much. just enough to make the skin at the back of his neck tighten. The hallway beyond was carved from old stone, fractured in places, with vines snaking through cracks in the ceiling. No glowing crystals. No system-generated torches. Just ambient light, soft and gray, as if the dungeon itself wasn't sure it wanted to be seen. Kael moved slowly, sword drawn, senses sharpened. No monsters attacked. No traps triggered. Just corridors that twisted like broken thoughts, looping back on themselves, then branching into paths that made no architectural sense. It didn't feel like a dungeon. It felt like a memory someone had built from fragments. After the third turn, he entered a circular chamber. The walls here were marked. Dozens of system interfaces burned into the stone, half erased and overlapping. Old logs, abandoned records, names, classes, skills. Most were unreadable, but one remained clear. He approached. Subject, Marrow Vance. Class, Architect, redacted. Status, removed. System note, core rejection, self-severed. Kael's breath caught. Self-severed. Someone had removed their own core. That wasn't supposed to be possible. The system was meant to bind you completely. Your class, your path, your role. It was embedded in your soul the moment it was assigned. To sever was to die. But Marrow Vance had survived long enough to build this place. Kael stared at the faded interface, then placed his hand on the stone. For a moment, the world flickered, and then a memory, not his, sitting in a dark room, watching code unravel across a wall of light. Voices arguing, something about containment, about class instability, about the system breaking down. And then calm. "I'll do it myself," a man said, and then everything turned white. Kael stumbled back, heart pounding. The system pulsed. Warning, memory contact detected. Hijack compatibility detected. Corrupted fragment. Proceeding may result in anchor desync. Do you wish to initiate override attempt? Kael's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a normal skill. It wasn't a path for power. It was something else. A fragment of a class that should have never existed. Something too dangerous for the system to keep, and too real for it to destroy. He stared at the prompt. The option hovered before him, waiting. He could try to take it. Attempt to bind a broken class, just to survive a little longer, just to gain something new, but would risk everything he'd built. The soul-linked anchor, the fragile grip on his own identity, the path he was trying to forge. Kael exhaled and stepped back. No, he dismissed the prompt. The system flickered again, briefly surprised, but it obeyed. The interface vanished. The walls dimmed. He left the chamber and walked back through the silent halls, boots echoing on stone. When he stepped into the sunlight again, something had changed. He hadn't gained a new power. He hadn't leveled up. But for the first time, he'd chosen not to. And that mattered. He opened his interface. Warrior, level 3. Anchor, soul-linked, stabilizing. Skill, system hijack. Next hijack, 3 days. Echo sync, 13%. System degradation, 14%. A new line shimmered faintly below his anchor. Anchor status, resistance profile established. Kael looked back at the crumbled dungeon, its doorway already starting to vanish beneath roots and moss. He knew now, power wasn't the hardest thing to gain in this world. The hardest thing was knowing when not to take it. The guard to the southern gate barely looked at Kael as he returned to South Branch. He handed over his token, nodded once, and walked through without a word. The silence suited him. So did the crowd. As long as he kept his hood up and his pace steady, no one asked questions. But something had changed. Not in the streets. In the air. A subtle tension. People moved faster. Conversations were shorter. Market stalls stayed open, but fewer hands reached for coin. And the guild watch had doubled in number. Posted at corners, posted near gates, posted on rooftops. The system felt like it was watching. And it was. Kael's system pinged the moment he stepped into the training quarter. Notice. Temporary token skin logged. Request pending. Analyst class review. Attention required. Classification office, level 2. Kael's hands tightened. He'd been flagged. Again. He moved slowly, calmly, toward the guild hall at the city's center. The wide stone doors loomed ahead, flanked by guards in formal blue armor. Their expressions were flat. Professional. They said nothing as he passed. Inside, the hall was quiet. Too quiet. He stepped up to the main desk. The same copper-haired clerk from before looked up and gave a polite smile. "We've received an internal request to update your record," she said. "A representative will meet you shortly." Kael nodded, said nothing, and waited. Minutes passed. Then the hallway behind the desk opened, and he entered. He wore gold-trimmed armor, not gaudy, but precise, regal in structure. His cloak bore the sigil of the system enforcers, a circle of 12 interlocking lines, like clockwork made from language. His eyes were gray, not pale, gray, like the fog before a storm. He didn't walk so much as glide. Kael stood straighter as the man approached. "Kael," the enforcer said, "please follow me." His voice was calm, deep, controlled. Kael followed him without protest. They walked into a side chamber, circular, windowless, lined with rune-etched walls that pulsed faintly with system energy. It wasn't a cell, but it wasn't free space either. The enforcer turned and motioned toward a chair. Kael sat. "So," the man said, "you're the one carrying the anomaly." Kael didn't speak. "I'm not here to punish you," the enforcer continued. "At least, not yet. I'm here to understand you." Kael met his gaze. Understand what? How a classless drift has managed to suppress full corruption without an anchor. "I have one," Kael said. "Now." The enforcer gave a faint smile. "A soul-linked token doesn't qualify. At best, it delays degradation. At worst, it masks it." Kael's jaw tightened. The man stepped closer. "You don't belong to the cycle. You've taken something that breaks the rules. And the system hates broken rules." "I didn't choose it." "No," the enforcer said. "But you've kept it. And that choice speaks louder." A long silence passed. Then the enforcer lifted a hand, and Kael's system interface opened without his permission. It appeared in front of him, glowing faintly, but completely exposed. "Warrior, level 3. Anchor, soul-linked, stabilizing. Skill, system hijack. Echo sync, 13%. System degradation, 14%. Next hijack, 2 days." The enforcer studied it for several seconds. Then looked Kael in the eye. "I've only seen 3 others with this skill in my lifetime. One vanished into a sealed realm. One tried to overwrite the world core itself. The last became a war." Kael didn't move. "I'm not them." "Not yet," the enforcer said softly. He reached into his cloak and pulled out something small, a sealed crystal, black and smooth, with a silver ring wrapped around its center. "Do you know what this is?" Kael shook his head. "It's a system suppressor," the enforcer said. "If your degradation hits 30%, this will deactivate your class completely and lock you out of further evolution." Kael's blood ran cold. "I'm not unstable." "Not now," the enforcer said. "But every step you take forward comes with borrowed thoughts, fragmented memories, and power that wasn't meant for you." He placed the crystal on the table. "You'll carry this. Voluntarily. If the number crosses the line, it activates. And if I don't agree?" The enforcer tilted his head. "Then we consider you a threat. You'll be marked, tracked, and eventually neutralized." Kael stared at the crystal. It pulsed faintly, waiting. After a long silence, he reached out and took it. The system responded immediately. "System update. Failsafe token linked. Class lock threshold. 30% degradation." Kael exhaled slowly. "I'm not going to lose myself." The enforcer's expression didn't change. "We all start with that conviction," he said. "The question is, who will you be when it's tested?" He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "There's a dungeon opening west of the Iron Range," he said. "Tier 4. High instability. Unassigned core fragments have been reported. No official sweep yet. No guild assignment." He glanced back. "If you want answers, start there." And then he was gone. Kael sat alone in the silent chamber, the failsafe crystal cool in his hand. His interface flickered softly. Echo sync, 14%. System degradation, 15%. Failsafe active. He stood, slowly. He'd faced monsters. He'd faced memories. Now he was facing time. Kael stood on the edge of the Iron Range. The wind howled through the jagged cliffs, sharp and dry, carrying with it the scent of dust, old blood, and burned stone. Mountains stretched across the horizon like cracked spines, dividing the eastern and western territories. And somewhere, hidden beneath those crags, was the dungeon. Unclaimed, unmapped, and, according to the enforcer, unstable. Kael stepped forward, his cloak dragging across uneven stone. The fail-safe crystal hung from a strap at his belt, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. Echo sync, 15%. System degradation, 18%. Failsafe, active. 3 days left until his hijack window reopened. He could feel the pressure building inside his skull. More dreams. More fragments. The woman's voice had returned, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Names. Regrets. Promises that weren't his. But his anchor held. Not firm. Not perfect. But there. He would make it through this dungeon. And he would not copy anything that cost him who he was. The entrance was barely visible. Just a split in the stone, half covered by fallen rocks and scorched brush. But when Kael stepped near, a ripple passed through the air. System energy, raw and unfiltered. The dungeon was alive. Just barely. He passed through the crack in the wall and into darkness. Light flickered from the runes carved along the walls. But they weren't stable. They twitched, shifted, as if unsure of what pattern they wanted to be. Kael drew his sword. The moment the blade cleared its sheath, the floor beneath him changed. It bent, shifted, reacted. He stepped forward, and the hallway twisted behind him, sealing the exit. No fanfare, no dramatic thud, just the quiet sense of something rearranging itself and deciding to trap him inside. Kael didn't panic. He kept moving. One corridor became 2, then 3. The wall stretched too far. The air thinned, and the system refused to give him a map. Even the basic navigation node, the dungeon interface every adventurer received upon entering, was missing. No prompts, no layout, no exit markers. Just a glowing string of symbols at the base of the wall that flickered into place as he passed. Class fragment detected. Warning. Host core not compatible. Stability rating, low. Chance of collapse, rising. Kael muttered under his breath. Is the dungeon falling apart, or am I? Neither answer comforted him. Eventually, the corridor opened into a wide chamber. Stone columns, jagged tiles, a broken arch in the far wall, and in the center, a floating shard, crystalline, flickering, not a full core, just a fragment. It pulsed erratically, light shifting in and out like a stuttering breath. Kael stepped toward it. The moment he crossed the halfway mark, the system roared. Dungeon instability, 84%. Combat override activated. Boss entity constructed. Adaptive echo form. From the far wall, something pulled itself out of the stone. It wasn't a monster. It was a copy of him. Kael staggered back. The thing wore his face, held a sword identical to his. Its interface appeared above its head. Echo form, incomplete. Class, warrior, simulated. Skill set, partial match. Behavior protocol, aggressive sync. Kael barely raised his blade before it struck. Steel met steel in a shower of sparks. The clone moved fast, faster than he did. Its timing was perfect. Its form, cleaner. Almost too clean, like it was built from idealized data, not real instincts. It didn't bleed, didn't speak. It just attacked, again and again, learning with each swing. Kael's breath came heavy. He dodged low, ducked a horizontal strike, countered with a kick to the knee. The clone didn't flinch, didn't slow. Its interface flickered. Sync progress, 42%. Kael's eyes widened. It was copying him, not just in shape, but in real time. And it was getting faster. He couldn't beat it by being himself. He had to be unpredictable. He dropped into a low stance, twisted mid-swing, and drove his shoulder into the clone's chest, then let himself fall, rolling under the next strike. The clone adjusted. Too fast. Kael triggered his system manually. Skill activated. Adrenaline spike. Pain seared through his limbs. His reflexes surged. He moved faster now. Fast enough to slip past the clone's guard and land a deep cut across its side. No blood. Just static. The clone staggered, then grinned. Kael froze. That was his grin. Not the confident one. The tired one. The one he gave when he knew he was losing, but refused to stop. The clone rushed again. This time, Kael didn't dodge. He stepped forward, blade reversed, and drove it through his own clone's core. The room trembled. The echo form shattered into dust. Kael felt his knees, gasping. The core fragment pulsed once more, then dissolved into light. Dungeon collapse detected. Auto-ejection imminent. The world around him twisted. And then, nothing. When he opened his eyes, he was outside the iron range. Face down in the dirt. The failsafe crystal still intact. His sword still at his side. And his system pulsing with quiet warning. Echo sync, 17%. System degradation, 19%. Failsafe, active. New entry logged. Echo form encounter, classless variation. Kael stood slowly, wiped blood from his lip, and stared up at the gray sky. The dungeon hadn't tested his strength. It had tested his identity. And next time, it might not be so kind. Kael didn't sleep that night. He sat beneath the crumbling ridge just east of the iron range, his back pressed to a cracked stone pillar that had long since forgotten its purpose. His sword lay across his lap, and the failsafe crystal pulsed steadily against his side like a second heartbeat. The wind moved through the valley like a whisper, never loud, never still. He opened his system panel. Warrior, level 3. Anchor, soul-linked, stabilizing. Skill, system hijack. Echo sync, 17%. System degradation, 19%. Failsafe, active. Next hijack, 1 day. 1 day left. And then a choice. Another system to hijack. Another path to risk. Another memory to absorb. He should have felt relief. But all he felt was tired. The fight with the echo form had drained him. Not just physically, but mentally. It had mimicked more than his combat style. It had copied his expression, his thought patterns, the way he moved when he was unsure. It had felt more like him than he did. He rested his head against the pillar and closed his eyes. That's when it happened. Not a dream, not a memory. A system prompt. System override initiated. Memory thread activation. Warning. Unauthorized access. Decrypting user classification. Kael's eyes snapped open. He was no longer by the ridge. He was standing in a white space. Endless, silent, with no walls and no sky. Only the interface in front of him. A black panel with gold lettering. User, unknown. Classification, invalid. Trace, active. System note, subject matched, redacted legacy. Beginning trace unlock. Memory thread number 1. Light exploded across the space. And then Kael was someone else. He stood in a hall of mirrors. Not glass, data. Reflections of other systems. Other classes. Floating panels, spinning through different evolutions. Guardian. Reaper. Judge. Echo blade. He reached toward one. A woman's voice stopped him. You're not ready. Kael turned. She stood at the far end of the room, dressed in robes made of raw interface code. Her face was blurred, features constantly shifting. Young, old, calm, furious. Thousands of identities flickering across a single frame. You weren't supposed to remember, she said. Kael tried to speak. Couldn't. You're waking up too fast, she continued. And the system is watching. Behind her, the panels cracked. And from them, shadows poured out. System agents. Not physical. Not human. Constructs made from enforcement protocols. Faceless. Armored in gold data plates. And moving without sound. She turned and raised a hand. The shadows froze. For now, they're only watching, she whispered. But soon they'll act. Kael finally found his voice. What is this? She looked at him, really looked at him, and for one moment her face stopped shifting. Her eyes were his. You've already lived this once. And then the light shattered. Kael woke up screaming. Back on the ridge, sword still in his lap, hands shaking. The sky was pale. Dawn was rising, and his system had changed. System hijack, class origin trace unlocked. Passive, threaded echo. New function, recall fragmented memory. Trace chain, 1 out of 6. Warning, you are now under system surveillance. Analyst level observers activated. Deviation score, 11%. Kael sat in silence, breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just drifting from himself. The system thought he was something else entirely. And worse, it remembered him. The mountains were behind him. The sky was pale gray, heavy with unshed rain. Kael moved quietly along a narrow path that followed the cliff edge, the wind brushing past like a whisper, trying to form words. The forest below was a blur of color and mist, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His system hadn't stopped flickering since dawn. Not glitching, activating. Whatever had awakened during the override wasn't done with him yet. System hijack, Class origin trace unlocked. Trace chain 1/6. Initiate trace 1. Echo blade memory thread. The prompt hovered in the corner of his vision, soft but insistent. It hadn't forced itself on him like a normal system message. This one waited, like it knew what it held, like it remembered him too. He found a sheltered spot beneath a moss-covered outcropping and sat cross-legged on the cold earth. His sword lay beside him, his hand resting lightly on the fail-safe crystal at his hip. He took a breath and accepted. Initiating trace 1. Echo blade. Warning. Memory sync may induce identity shift. Echo lock recommended. Proceed? He confirmed. The world blinked. Then everything changed. He stood in a hall of shadowed glass. The walls shimmered with reflections, not of him, but of another. A woman. Light armor, twin blades at her hips, her eyes covered by a dark blindfold marked with silver runes. Her presence was quiet, deadly, unapologetically alone. Kael knew her name before it was spoken. Vera, level 72. Class, Echo Blade. System memory trace. Full combat imprint. He didn't see her memories. He became her. The next moment, he was moving through the trees of an unfamiliar forest. Night sky above, blood on his shoulder, echoes pulsing through the hilts of her blades. Whispers flooded his ears, ghostly after-images of those she'd fought. The Echo Blade didn't kill cleanly. She severed essence, slicing through the energy left behind by others. Her power didn't just cut the body, it disrupted the system itself. Broken skills, fragmented class data, combatants left staggering as if they forgot how to stand. Kael felt it all. The speed, the silence, the clarity. A technique surged through his hands. Echo Strike, a fast, arcing slash that targeted system threads directly. Not the flesh, not the bone, but the binding rules underneath. He used it once, and the air split with a soundless scream. The system flared. Memory sync, 43%. Warning, emotional drift detected. Identity anchor weakening. Kael gasped. Her thoughts were flooding into him now. Not just movement, not just style. Feelings, memories. A cold evening by a fire, blade across her lap. The name of someone she'd lost, repeating like a mantra. A mission she hadn't completed. A betrayal. Don't trust the council, she whispered through Kael's mouth, though he hadn't meant to speak. They know what we are. They knew before we did. Kael tried to push back, tried to remind himself who he was. I am Kael, not Alan, not the Echo Blade. But the trace pushed harder. He was on a battlefield now. Echoes flaring all around. Warriors falling. Mages unraveling. And above them all, the system node, glowing with pure data, its voice whispering directly into Alan's mind. You were never meant to survive. The memory began to fragment. Kael focused everything he had. On his breath, on his heartbeat, on the faint weight of Lyra's charm still at his neck. Anchor response detected. Soul link engaged. Memory stabilizing. The pressure faded. Slowly, the scene unraveled. The battlefield vanished. The forest dimmed. The hall of mirrors collapsed. And Kael opened his eyes again beneath the cliff outcropping. His breath came in ragged bursts, but he was still himself. The system chimed softly. Trace 1. Echo Blade completed. Skill learned. Echo Strike. Echo Variant LV1. Passive Echo Signature Integration. 2%. Class Tag acquired. Blade of Fracture. Legacy Fragment logged. Alan Vera. Status. Deceased. Trace Chain Progress. 1/6. Kael lay back against the rock, hand shaking as he touched the charm on his chest. It was happening faster now. Not just memory, not just skill. He was absorbing ghosts, pieces of people long gone. And the system? The system was watching quietly, allowing it, encouraging it. But for what purpose? Kael stared up at the gray sky, wondering if the other 5 traces would be stronger, more painful, more personal, or worse, if one of them would be him. Kael hadn't moved for hours. He sat on a mossy ledge beneath the cliff, overlooking the deep green forest below. The wind rolled through the trees like a slow breath, carrying with it the scent of rain and old bark. His sword rested beside him, untouched since the trace ended. The memory of Alan Vera, the Echo Blade, still lingered in his limbs. He could feel the afterimage of her movements in every muscle. a tendency to shift his stance slightly left. The instinct to reach for a second blade he didn't carry. She was gone, but her echo wasn't. Kael opened his system panel again. Warrior, level 3. Anchor, soul-linked stabilizing. Skill, system hijack. Trace chain, 1/6. Learned, Echo Strike. Echo variant LV1. Echo Sync, 20%. System degradation, 22%. Failsafe, active. Next hijack, available. The window was open. He could hijack again, but the idea made his skin crawl. Every step forward brought more of someone else into his mind. Every skill earned came with a voice attached. And the worst part? He was beginning to understand them. Not just what they'd done, but why. Why they broke the system. Why they ran from the core. Why they tried to change the rules. Kael stood and brushed dirt from his cloak. His feet moved before he decided to go anywhere. Like they knew where he needed to be. He headed back towards South Branch. But not to the guild. Not to the enforcers. He was looking for someone else. South Branch's West District was quieter than the others. No guild halls. No markets. Just low stone buildings, flickering lanterns, and alleys filled with steam from old vents that never stopped leaking. He followed a half-remembered path. Not his own memory. Alan's. A contact. A place she once went when she needed to vanish. He found it at the edge of an abandoned courtyard. A simple door. No sign. Just a faded rune on the frame. One that had been etched into the Echo Blade's blindfold. He knocked once. Then again. The third knock opened the door. A man stood inside, tall, narrow, with eyes that didn't blink. Not a fighter. A scholar, maybe. His clothes were simple, stitched with threads that shimmered slightly when they caught the light. He studied Kael for a long moment, then said, "Which name did the system forget?" Kael didn't understand the question, but something made him answer. All of them. The man stepped aside. "Then you're welcome here." The room was filled with records. Scrolls. Old books. Data crystals wrapped in silk cords. System nodes held in stasis fields that flickered with unstable memory. But the most curious part? None of it was powered by the current system grid. Everything here was off the network. Independent. Hidden. Kael followed the man deeper inside. "You're not the first one to walk in carrying ghosts," the man said. "But you may be the youngest." "Who are you?" "We're not a faction," the man replied. "Not a guild. Not even a rebellion. We're just readers. Listeners. Archivists of the unapproved." He stopped at a narrow desk lit by a hovering runestone and pulled out a sealed crystal. It pulsed once in Kael's presence. "Your trace is bleeding energy," the man said. It triggered several of our listening threads. He placed the crystal in Kael's hand. The system responded instantly. Unauthorized archive accessed. Classification, Legacy Black Record. Locked. Title, name_redacted_040. Status, compromised. Entry note. If this record reaches a living system, activate Echo Lock and trace origin ID. Signature match detected, 94%. Matching subject, Kael, user flag, unknown. Kael's pulse stopped. He read the line again. Then again. Matching subject, Kael. The record knew his name, and it predated his arrival in this world. The man leaned closer. "That's not from any known class tree," he said softly. "It was buried in the code of a fractured core, one from a dungeon that imploded 10 years ago. We've never been able to open it." Kael stared at the crystal. His fingers shook. "Do you wish to unlock Legacy Black Record Name _redacted_040? "Yes," he whispered. The crystal pulsed. Once. Twice. Then a voice filled the room. Faint. Distant. But unmistakable. His voice. "This is Kael. Designation, override candidate. Echo sync unstable. Trace chain incomplete. If you're hearing this, then I failed." Kael staggered backward. "No." The recording continued. "I was part of a test. We weren't supposed to exist. Our systems were custom-built, stacked from rejected code and unregistered evolution lines. They called us thread walkers." The voice faltered, then resumed. "Each time we hijacked, we weren't stealing powers. We were chasing ourselves. Versions we might have been, if the system had chosen differently." Kael collapsed to his knees, eyes wide. His voice, his other self, spoke one last line. "Finish the chain. Lock the echoes. Rewrite the route. Before it finds you again." The crystal dimmed. The room went silent. Kael didn't move. His system pulsed with new information. Trace chain, 2/6. Hidden class tag unlocked. Threadwalker. Internal ID match. Confirmed. Echo signature priority raised. Warning. System is now tracking your original loop. Kael stared at the message, heart pounding. He wasn't a fluke. He wasn't an accident. He was part of something bigger, something broken. And whatever it was, it had already started again. Kael left the archive at dusk. The west wind brushed past him as he stepped into the alley, carrying the faint scent of old parchment and melted stone. Behind him, the door sealed shut, hidden once more behind illusion and silence. The crystal with the voice, his voice, rested in a wrapped cloth inside his cloak. He hadn't spoken since hearing it. Not a word, not even to himself. He walked the long way around South Branch's West District, avoiding main roads and open courtyards. Not out of fear, out of confusion. Trace chain, 2/6. Echo sync, 22%. System degradation, 24%. New tag, Threadwalker. Status, active loop detected. Warning, legacy data has entered recall phase. He wasn't just copying systems. He was chasing versions of himself. The name, Threadwalker, echoed in his mind like a prophecy he was never meant to hear. Kael had always wondered why his system hijack didn't feel like a gift. Now he understood. It wasn't meant to be a power. It was a mechanism, a tool built for something else entirely, to trace identity across broken timelines, across lives, across loops. He stepped into the outer training yard under fading sky, passing rows of empty, sparring grounds and stone markers etched with fallen names. He needed to move. He needed to do something before the system took more from him. At the edge of the yard, he pulled up his interface. Hijack available. Nearby class signature detected. Range, 42 meters. Class type, Scout Ranger, level 4. Do you wish to hijack? He hovered his finger over the prompt, then stopped. He didn't want it. Not the scout skills. Not the instincts. Not the memories. He needed something that tied back to him. He whispered a command instead. System, search for Threadwalker records. There was no immediate reply. But then, legacy link detected. Dungeon node. Ruin of Sector Delta, 13. Entry status, sealed. Trace type, memory loop. Anchor host unknown. Do you wish to activate Thread Pulse? Kael narrowed his eyes. Thread Pulse. Warning. Activating Thread Pulse may attract system attention. Proceed? He thought about the voice on the crystal. The man he used to be. The one who tried to finish the trace chain once and failed. Kael clenched his jaw. Proceed. The system pulsed. A wave of energy rushed outward. Not loud, not explosive, but felt. Deep, like a second heartbeat beneath the earth. Like the air itself had briefly recognized him. Somewhere, far from South Branch, something woke up. Thread pulse initiated. Echo response pending. Location, ruin of Sector Delta, 13. Estimated distance, 138 kilometers. Alert, 2 analyst class trackers have registered movement. Surveillance level, elevated. System node, you are no longer hidden. Kael closed the panel. That was it then. No more shadows. No more pretending to be a drifting warrior with a strange skill. He had called out to the system, and it had answered. Now it was watching again. So were the enforcers. So was whatever remained of the Threadwalkers. He walked to the edge of the yard, where the stone path curved down toward the city's lower levels. The lights of South Branch flickered in the distance. Warm, familiar, unaware. He was still himself, but not for long, and not unless he fought for it. Far away, in a collapsed dungeon beneath a dead mountain, a node activated. A panel long sealed flickered to life, its runes stuttering with outdated code. User detected. Thread signature. Match confirmed. Access request. Pending. Awaiting Kael. 3 days of travel. Kael moved fast, never stopping for long. Through twisted mountain paths, decaying bridges, and valleys overgrown with roots that pulsed faintly with forgotten magic. He avoided villages. Avoided patrols. Camped in places where even the birds no longer flew. His system whispered constantly now. Echo sync, 25%. System degradation, 26%. Trace chain, 2/6. Thread pulse signal, stable. Destination approaching, ruin of Sector Delta, 13. Estimated arrival, 3.2 kilometers. He could feel it drawing him closer. Each step tugged at something behind his eyes, an ache like memory, but deeper. Not from thought, from instinct. Muscle memory that didn't belong to him. When he reached the edge of the final ridge, he saw the ruins for the first time. Delta 13 had once been a fortress, or maybe a laboratory, or maybe both. The entire structure had caved inward, its metal bones twisted and fused with stone. Obsidian towers leaned at angles too sharp for physics, and the surrounding land had warped, trees bent backward, their roots exposed like black veins against red earth. Kael stood at the threshold, and the system responded. Thread walker, no detected. User signature, Kael, match, 98.4%. Memory lock present. Initiate memory recall sequence. He stepped forward. Do it. The world shifted. Suddenly, he was inside. Not just the ruins. The past. The light changed. The broken towers stood tall again. The air hummed with system code. And Kael was no longer alone. People moved through the halls. Men and women wearing light armor embedded with interface threads. Their eyes glowed faintly. Some had class tags floating beside their heads. Thread walkers. System weavers. Every one of them carried a piece of what Kael now bore. System hijack. Upgraded and fused with different class lines. He saw an alchemist weaving stolen beast traits into spell runes. A swordsman splitting into two bodies mid-strike. A healer using a corrupted interface to reverse death, briefly. And at the center of it all, a younger version of himself. He wasn't wearing armor, just a coat etched with glyphs, a gauntlet wrapped around his right arm, glowing with system circuits. And he was smiling. The other Kael leaned over a table with half-open data cores and scrawled fragments of code, glowing like fireflies. This is it, he said. The final layer. Once we finish the sixth trace, we'll unlock the origin thread. Beside him, a woman replied. Her voice was sharp, familiar. You keep pushing the limit, she said. If the system notices this much deviation, it won't just collapse the node. It'll collapse us. Maybe, the other Kael replied. But maybe that's what it wants. Maybe the system is waiting for someone to step too far. Kael watched the conversation unfold like a dream he barely remembered. His heart pounded. Sweat beaded at his brow. He knew that voice. He knew that place. And he knew what came next. The memory shifted violently. Flames. Screams. A red alert flashing across every surface. Thread error. Catastrophic loop detected. Purge sequence initiated. The fortress had fallen apart from the inside. The thread walkers scattered. Some fought. Some turned to data. Some disappeared. And the other Kael. He stood in the center of it all, arms wide, absorbing the collapse into himself. As the ceiling cracked open and the sky above warped into a system interface, he spoke one final command. Hijack my own line. If I lose myself, let me find me again. And the light consumed everything. Kael woke up in the ruins, collapsed in a shallow basin of stone and twisted metal, breathing. Whole, but barely. His system screamed in his vision. Memory thread recovered. Loop 0. Trace chain progress. 3/6. Passive gained. Loop instinct. In moments of fatal decision, recall stored reaction data from previous loops. Echo sync. 28%. System degradation. 28%. Legacy tag updated. Thread walker. Confirmed. Root loop identity. Kael. Loop 0 origin. He sat up slowly, every muscle aching. But he was awake. More than he had ever been. He wasn't just chasing his past now. He was his past. And someone knew that. Because as he stood, brushing dust from his cloak, a panel shimmered in front of him. Alert. Enforcer class presence en route. ETA 1 hour. Command directive. Retrieve the thread walker. Kael narrowed his eyes. The system had waited long enough. Now it was coming for him. Kael didn't run. He stood at the edge of the broken chamber, wind cutting across the high ridge as dark clouds built along the western horizon. Below, the collapsed ruins of Sector Delta 13 stretched in every direction, cracked metal, exposed conduit, and the echo of a life he barely remembered. But he remembered enough. Alert. Enforcer class presence en route. ETA 52 minutes. Unit designation. Protocol AE04. Mission: retrieval of Threadwalker asset. Class tag: execution conditional. Not just observation, not questioning. Retrieval. And if he resisted, execution. Kael opened his interface with slow, deliberate motion. Echo sync, 28%. System degradation, 29%. Trace chain, 3/6. Passive, loop instinct, active. Threadwalker protocol, authorized. Status, being tracked. The system wasn't hiding anymore. It was hunting him, and it was sending something powerful. He turned from the wind and headed deeper into the ruins, finding a narrow trench of broken steel that led to a partial access tunnel. Half-lit, just enough cover. He would face the Enforcer here, not because it was the safest, but because it was familiar. As he moved, fragments of memory stirred. This trench had been part of a test zone, a combat evaluation range from the original Threadwalker project. He didn't remember the exact blueprint, but his body remembered how to fight in it. Exactly 48 minutes later, the temperature dropped. Not by much, just enough to make the air go still. Just enough to feel unnatural. Kael crouched behind a shattered panel, blade drawn, heart steady. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Precise. Controlled. Too balanced for a human. A figure stepped into view. Tall. Clad in gleaming white armor, etched with golden system lines. No visible face. Just a mirrored helmet reflecting broken light. Above its head, a line of text burned into reality. Enforcer. AE04. Class. System Judicator. Authority level. Red. Status. Engaged. Protocol lock active. Kael stepped out. The Enforcer turned its head slightly. You accessed the origin node, it said. You triggered the loop trace. And you used the pulse without approval. Kael didn't respond. The Enforcer raised one hand, and a shimmering spear of pure interface data formed in its palm. You are no longer eligible for containment. If you do not submit, this cycle ends. Kael's grip tightened. Then he said, I've already lived this once. And moved. The Enforcer was fast, but Kael was faster than before. His loop instinct surged to life, predicting the angle of the spear as it thrust forward. He rolled under it, slashed for the knee joint, but the blade skidded off a layer of system shielding. The Enforcer turned with mechanical grace and fired a wave of binding code. Kael's interface screamed. Root access attempted. Thread override countered. He shouted and released a burst of raw system energy, knocking the code back just enough to dodge sideways. Sparks lit the trench. The Enforcer advanced. Your resistance confirms echo saturation. You are not stable. Kael ducked into cover, breathing hard. Maybe not, he said. But I'm not broken either. His mind raced. He couldn't beat the Enforcer in power. But maybe, just maybe, he could beat it in pattern. He dropped his blade, then sprinted. No attack, just full retreat. The Enforcer followed. Predictable. Controlled. Just like in the old Loop Zero simulations. Kael ran straight for the sealed tunnel gate, then stopped dead, flipped backward, and slammed his hand in the nearby power conduit. The interface flared. Emergency override. Loop pattern sync engaged. Echo loop cross signal detected. Local system disrupted. The floor under the Enforcer collapsed. A buried panel fired upward, slamming into its legs with full kinetic recoil. The Enforcer staggered, just long enough for Kael to leap forward and drive the failsafe crystal into its chest plate. Not to kill, to lock. Threadwalker protocol. Anchor tag engaged. Echo override activated. Judicator core. Suppressed. Temporary. The Enforcer dropped to one knee, frozen. Kael pulled his blade again and held it at the unit's throat. But he didn't strike. The system pulsed. Class memory detected. Threadwalker compatibility match. Partial. Do you wish to hijack? Class. System Judicator. Fragment only. Kael froze. The opportunity was real. He could copy part of the Enforcer's class. Learn how they moved. How they tracked. How they enforced. But at what cost? More system bleed. More memory. More danger of becoming something else. He stared at the prompt. Then said, no. And dismissed it. The system hesitated. Then dimmed. The Enforcer slumped. Deactivated. Not destroyed. Just delayed. Kael stepped back and opened his panel again. Echo sync. 30%. System degradation. 30%. Failsafe status. Trigger threshold reached. Failsafe will activate at next spike. He exhaled slowly, then stared at the wreckage of the judicator. The system had shown its hand, but he wasn't done playing yet. The ruins had gone quiet. Kael stood over the disabled enforcer, watching the soft flicker of its system core fade beneath its armored chest. He didn't know how long the override would hold. Minutes, maybe, hours if he was lucky. But he couldn't stay. He turned and walked away, deeper into the valley. The system's silence was unnerving. No threats, no prompts, just data still ticking in the corner of his vision. Echo sync, 30%. System degradation, 30%. Trace chain, 3/6. Thread walker protocol, active. Memory access, trace 4 available. Identity match detected. Kael. Crosslink present. Legacy signal, inactive. Trace 4, the vanished echo. Begin. Kael stopped beside a fallen monolith. One of the old towers, shattered in a collapse centuries ago. Grass had grown around it, untouched by corruption. Here, at least, the world didn't resist him. He sat and accepted. The memory wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It began in silence. A mountain ledge. A man sat on a flat stone overlooking a sea of clouds, the wind stirring his long gray cloak. His armor was simple, unpolished. His hands rested over a blade wrapped in black cloth. He looked young, but there was something ancient in his stillness. Kael knew his name immediately. Lirankas. Threadwalker class. Null step echo. Trace ID. 4. Status. Voluntarily removed from system network. This wasn't a class designed to fight. It was designed to leave. Kael watched Liran rise slowly and walk the edge of the cliff, where system threads shimmered faintly in the air, remnants of a collapsed dungeon far below. Then the voice came. Soft. Steady. His own once again, but older, narrating the memory. I found the edge, Liran said. Not of the world. Of the code. Of the rules. Kael saw it, not with his eyes, but through the trace. The moment Liran stepped off the cliff, he didn't fall. He vanished. System particles burst like mist. No explosion. No impact. Just erasure. Not death. Absence. Kael stood in the memory, surrounded by stone. Alone. But the system flickered around him. Threadwalker legacy fragment located. Trace 4 confirmed. Class signature. Null step echo. Passive skill unlocked. Veiled existence. Temporarily hide from system tracking protocols at will. Duration. 8 seconds. Level 1. Cooldown. 60 seconds. Tag acquired. The one who chose to disappear. Trace chain. 4/6. Kael gasped as the vision unraveled. When he blinked again, he was back at the ruin's edge. The grass rustled around him. His fingers twitched. He felt the trace of a new passive, soft beneath his system layer. A hidden switch. A part of him the world could no longer find, for a moment. And yet, Liran had used it forever. Not to escape battle. Not to hide from the system. But to walk away. Kael stood slowly. His heart ached in his chest. Would he do the same? If he found the edge? If this world offered no peace, no freedom, and no path forward except isolation, would he choose to vanish? The thought haunted him. He didn't have the answer. Not yet. But something deeper stirred beneath the silence. Another presence. Another trace waiting. A voice, older, colder, rippled through his interface. Next trace unlocked. 5/6. Subject. The one who burned the anchor. Warning. Volatile memory detected. Emotional instability. High. Class signature. Unstable. Begin when ready. Kael closed the prompt. Not yet. Not this one. He stood and walked toward the edge of the hills, wind brushing his face, cloak stirring. One trace taught him how to cut fate. One taught him how to survive collapse. Another taught him how to step away. And the next might teach him how to burn. The wind had changed. Kael stood at the edge of the northern plateau, looking down over the deep chasm where the ruins gave way to wild, corrupted forest. The trees swayed differently here, not with the breeze, but with pressure, as if the very air bent around a presence that wasn't visible. His system had gone quiet. Not broken, not off, just waiting. Trace chain, 4/6. Next trace available. Subject: the one who burned the anchor. Class: redacted. Emotional stability: critical. System notes: this trace contains non-standard behavior and high instability. Proceed with caution. Kael sat with his back to a boulder and stared up at the sky. Clouds moved like slow waves above him. He thought of Liran, the man who had walked away, and of Alan, the woman who fought with the weight of ghosts. Each of them had faced the system differently. But this next trace, it felt different. Darker, closer. He took a breath and accepted. There was no transition, no dreamscape, no battlefield, just fire. Kael stood in a memory that felt more like a wound. The air pulsed with static. The sky was red, too red, as if the world had bled from the inside out. Buildings collapsed in the distance. System walls shattered. Warning panels blinked above his head like dying stars. And at the center of it all, a girl knelt in a burning room, her hands resting on a chain of glowing symbols carved into the floor. Her name pulsed through Kael's system like heat. Ressavalent, Threadwalker class, Anchor forged. Status: rejected. Trace 5, the one who burned the anchor. Kael couldn't move, not because he was frozen, but because the memory was too heavy. Like the weight of her final choice still echoed through time. Ressa looked up, eyes red from smoke. Or crying. Or both. And she whispered, "They built it into me." Kael didn't understand. Not until the system translated. Anchor class, Soul Forge type. Function: bind user's class and memory to one unbreakable node. Side effect: identity becomes static. Warning: attempting to resist anchor causes system backlash. Result: core degradation, fatal. And she had resisted. Not just the system, not just her class. The anchor itself. The memory shifted. Kael now stood beside her as she walked through a war zone of broken echo rooms. Old Threadwalker chambers lined with failed stabilizers and flickering trace logs. Dozens of class fragments screamed silently through shattered panels. The system begged her to stop, but she didn't. She reached a terminal. Her own system hovered beside her. Anchor integrity, 96%. Degradation, 94%. Hijack potential, locked. Command authorization, forbidden. She bypassed it anyway, with her own hands. She rewrote her command thread. Manually, Kael could only watch as she tore open her own class signature and severed the anchor's code. Her scream wasn't physical. It was coded, a raw ripple through the interface. So powerful the walls cracked and the core fractured. Anchor burn initiated. System warning: you are no longer bound. Status: error. Status: error. Status: user unknown. She collapsed. Not dead, but free. Free in the most violent, self-inflicted way possible. And as Kael watched her body flicker between system states, the trace whispered the final note. She chose to be forgotten. The memory unraveled. And Kael awoke. He lay on his back, gasping. His system flickered wildly. Trace chain, 5/6. Echo sync, 34%. System degradation, 33%. Passive gained. Anchor rejection. Resist 4 system tags for 3 seconds. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Memory fragment. Ressavalent. Status: unknown. System status: unstable behavior logged. Enforcer class alert level: red. Kael pushed himself to his feet, shaking. This trace was different. Not about evolution. Not about escape. It was a memory of choice. The choice to be unshackled, even if it meant destroying everything that defined you. Kael opened his hand and saw a faint scar of light, glowing beneath his skin. Anchor status: soul-linked. Response: fading. Warning: instability detected. His anchor was slipping. The same system that once held him together was now splintering under the pressure of what he remembered. Kael stood in the cold light of the coming storm, staring down into the forest below. Only one trace remained. And if what he suspected was true, the final trace was his. The wind had stilled. Not even the trees swayed anymore. No birds called. No insects stirred. Kael walked alone through a hollow basin, surrounded by stone pillars, each one cracked with age and covered in half-erased runes. The final trace had pulled him here. Not with direction, not with a prompt, but with recognition. He stepped to the center of the circle and opened his system panel. Trace chain, 5/6. Echo sync, 34%. System degradation, 34%. Final trace detected. Identity match, Kael. Origin loop, 0. Class, redacted. Status, expunged. Warning, trace 6 is a closed loop. Memory cannot be paused. Emotional resistance, 7%. Anchor stability, fading. Begin final trace. Kael stared at the words. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he said aloud, quietly, begin. The world broke. Not shattered. Not burned. It simply folded inward, like a page turned backward. Kael found himself in a room. White walls. Black ceiling. Lights that pulsed without warmth. This wasn't a memory. This was a recording. And he wasn't watching someone else. He was watching himself. Younger. Sharper. Dressed in a dark coat marked with symbols of every class line. Warrior. Mage. Assassin. Healer. Hybrid. Each one crossed out. Rejected. He stood before a table covered in system cores, half disassembled. Behind him, a panel glowed with one word. Threadwalker class. Prototype. 001. Status. Control failed. Kael, the past Kael, was talking. Not to anyone in the room. To a recording. To himself. If this works, I'll never see this message, the echo said. Because I won't exist anymore. I'll be overwritten. Loop corrected. Reformatted by the system to try again. But just in case. He turned to face the viewer. His eyes were the same. Tired. Determined. I broke it. The system. I broke the thing that bound us. The core behind every class, every identity, every pre-written path. It was never designed to let people choose who they were. Just how they served. Kael stood frozen, heart pounding. The echo continued. I made hijack to fight that. To steal from it. To take every rule and bend it back into a question. Who could I be if I was never told what to be? The panel flickered. Error. User stability collapse. Trace abandoned. Forced reset initiated. Past Kael's expression broke. I couldn't hold it. He stepped back from the table. I was so close. But I couldn't stabilize the anchor. I couldn't finish the sixth trace. I couldn't stop the system from resetting me. He reached for the console and placed his hand on the core. If you're watching this, that means I looped. Kael's breath caught. I looped into you. The world shattered again. Kael fell forward, breath seizing in his lungs, mind screaming with the weight of self. The voice echoed still. You're not a new user. You're the same one. Over and over. Broken down. Recycled. And each time you get closer. But each time, the system corrects you. Rewrites you. Makes you forget. The system interface reappeared. But it looked different. Rougher. More real. More raw. Final trace recovered. Echo sync. 40%. System degradation. 35%. Passive gained. Memory thread lock. Retain identity during trace bleed. Prevent involuntary reset. Root class signature recovered. Thread walker 0 type. Override loop. Active. Status. Manual continuation enabled. Kael lay in the dirt. Shaking. But smiling. Because for the first time, he remembered. He wasn't just tracing others. He was tracing himself. All of it. The fear. The failure. The systems he built and broke. The people he couldn't save. The anchor he could never forge. The version of him that gave up. And the one that tried again anyway. He stood. Slowly. And opened his system one last time. Trace chain. Complete. New objective unlocked. Override the system. Path to origin core. Locked behind one final gate. Enforcer class authority. Incoming. Full unit detected. Time to arrival. 2 hours. System warning. If you die now, the loop resets. Kael looked to the horizon. Then drew his sword. Not this time. The sun didn't rise that morning. The sky remained locked in gray. Not from clouds, but from the presence of something unseen. The system was active. Everywhere. Listening. Watching. But Kael no longer walked in its shadow. He walked with his head up, eyes clear, boots steady as he climbed the cracked ridge overlooking the northern valley. The last time he came this way, he hadn't known who he was. Now, he remembered everything. And that changed everything. Trace chain. Complete. Echo sync. 40%. System degradation. 35%. New tag acquired. Override class candidate. Root class signature stabilizing. THREDWELKER. 0 type. Objective activated. Locate and unlock the origin core. Status. Sealed by Enforcer Protocol. Kael pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders as he stepped onto the wide plateau. The wind howled, colder than before, full of static. In the distance, rising from a blackened gorge, was the tower. Tall, silent, and sealed in golden system runes. The origin core. The place where all classes, anchors, and identities were once constructed. Where the first rules of the world had been written. Where the system had begun. And now, Kael had a single goal. Break it. He stepped forward, and the system reacted. Enforcer class authority detected. Full unit deployment active. Designation, Core Guardian. Class, Celestial Enforcer. Level, unknown. Status, Terminal Class Barrier. The air split. Not like lightning. Like code. A tear in space opened across the plateau, and from it stepped a figure made of radiant white plating and flowing system threads. Armor inscribed with laws, not names. Its body was fluid, inhuman, its hands crackling with raw interface energy. It looked at Kael with no face, and still, he could feel the judgment. You are the Echo, it said. Loop broken. Identity deviant. Class rejected. Kael's voice was calm. I'm also the one who built the system you're guarding. The Enforcer raised its hand. Then you will die with it. The battle began without warning. Kael barely dodged the first strike. An arc of white-hot system light that cut the stone behind him into dust. His instinct screamed, but his mind was clear. He triggered Veiled Existence, vanishing from tracking lines for just 8 seconds. The Enforcer's targeting lost him, but only for a moment. Kael moved, fast, sliding low, slashing upward. Sparks flew. No damage. The system repelled all conventional attacks. But Kael wasn't here to fight conventionally. He opened his interface mid-dash. Skill Fusion. Echo Strike plus Combat Reflex. Thread Integration active. New technique formed. Fracture Step. Kael blinked forward. Not teleportation, but memory step, slipping into the space he would have moved into before the Enforcer could process it. He struck. This time, the blade connected. Not with metal. With code. The Enforcer staggered. Its interface flickered. Integrity breach, 6%. Echo-based deviation detected. Combat protocol, adjusting. Kael backed off, breath sharp. His vision pulsed. The 6 traces weren't just memories anymore. They were fuel. He remembered Alan's blade work, Ressa's defiance, Liran's step outside the system. He triggered them, one after another. Anchor rejection to block a core lock spell. Loop instinct to predict a volley of light spears. Thread pulse to destabilize the field around the core tower. The system tried to compensate, but it was too late. Kael wasn't playing by its rules. He was playing by his. The final blow wasn't a strike. It was a command. Kael leapt, spinning in midair, and flung the failsafe crystal, still charged, still linked, to the point above the tower's gate where the original threads met. He triggered every trace at once. Override command initiated. Threadwalker protocol. Full sync. Unlocking origin core. Warning. Class lawbreak detected. Error. 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 The tower screamed. A sound like grinding time. The golden rune shattered. The Enforcer disintegrated into light. And Kael landed before the ancient gate, panting, bleeding, but still alive. The gate opened. Not with power. With recognition. And inside. Welcome, Kael. Threadwalker status. Acknowledged. Override path available. Do you wish to change the rules? Kael stared into the glowing chamber beyond, then whispered, yes. The chamber was nothing like he imagined. No machinery, no control panels, no thrones of glowing metal. Just a wide, circular platform suspended in endless white light. The air didn't move. There was no sound. Yet Kael could feel everything vibrating beneath his feet. The system wasn't speaking with a voice anymore. It was listening, waiting. He took another step forward. A pulse answered. Threadwalker, Kael. Echo sync, 41%. Degradation, stabilized. Trace chain, complete. Core access, granted. Override path, open. Begin rule selection. Kael stared at the prompt. This was what the others hadn't reached. This was what his past selves had been denied. He wasn't just here to break free. He was here to decide what comes next. A new panel unfolded before him. 6 glowing threads spiraling outward like veins of golden code. Each thread pulsed with a different question, flickering between languages, symbols, and data. He reached for the first, and the system asked, Rule 1. Do classes define identity? Current law, yes. Override option. No, identity forms first. Class follows the soul's path. Kael didn't even hesitate. Override. The thread dimmed. Rewritten. A second thread responded. Rule 2. Are anchors required? Current law. Yes. Anchor is mandatory for system integration. Override option. No, anchor optional. Identity must be sufficient. Kael clenched his jaw. He remembered Ressa, burning her own anchor just to be free. He whispered, Override. Another thread shimmered, pulsing sharply as if resisting. Rule 3. Can a user carry multiple paths? Current law. No, only one class line permitted per life. Override option. Yes, but at a cost. Choice carries consequence. Kael hesitated here. He thought of the burden of carrying so many fragments. He nodded once. Override. The system responded with a gentle hum. Not approval. Acknowledgement. He reached the fourth thread. But this time, there was no question. Only a name. Rule 4. Kael. Identity status. Loop-bound. Number of resets. 7. Current status. Memory restored. Override option. In loop. Finalize this life. Kael stared. His breath caught. No more resets. No more coming back as someone else. Somewhere else. Chasing the same broken answers. If he accepted this override, this would be the last time. And yet, he smiled. Not with fear. With certainty. Override. The platform shifted. The threads dimmed. And the final interface appeared. This time, there was no code. Just one line. One final question. Written not by the system, but by a human hand. His hand. What do you want the next Kael to remember? Kael stepped closer, heartbeat steady. He thought of Lyra, the charm she'd given him. He thought of Alan's eyes beneath the blindfold, of Ressa screaming as she severed herself from the world, of Liran walking off the cliff and never falling. He thought of all the versions of himself, failing, forgetting, restarting. And he wrote only one thing. That I chose. Underscore. The chamber shook. The platform cracked. But it didn't collapse. It shed. The white light peeled back, revealing a storm of raw system energy swirling outward, rewriting the invisible web that held the world together. And Kael stood at its center, no longer a wanderer, no longer a hijacker. He was now something else. Class acquired. Override class, true thread walker. Core title, the one who remembers. Thread status, root chain stabilized. Anchor, self. Kael stepped out of the origin core as the gates shut behind him. The system was quiet now. Not watching. Not correcting. Just waiting. The wind met him again, cold and clean. The world hadn't changed yet. But it would. Because now Kael wasn't chasing power. He was carrying a new law. One no system could unwrite. Kael walked alone. The origin core had vanished behind him. Sealed once more. Hidden from the world beneath a veil of sky and silence. The mountain ridge where it once stood now appeared empty. Like the land had never been disturbed. But the silence was deceptive. The world had changed. Kael could feel it in the threads beneath his skin. Not magic. Not power. Law. The system no longer whispered constraints into his mind. No more forced pathways. No more anchor dependency. No more hijack countdowns. Only the presence of his own choices. His class panel reflected that now. Name, Kael. Class, Threadwalker, Override class. Level. Anchor, self-defined. Traits, loop instinct / veiled existence / anchor rejection / trace memory / fracture step. System status, independent. Observer network, disabled. Notes, no longer bound by core enforcement protocols. Kael had stepped outside the rulebook, but the world didn't know that yet, and it wasn't ready. 2 days later, he reached the outskirts of South Branch. The guards didn't recognize him, at least not at first, but their stares lingered. The badge at his belt was no longer recognized by the scanstone, and his class signature returned nothing. Not unknown. Not unregistered. Blank. He passed through without resistance, but only because the system hadn't caught up yet. The streets of South Branch buzzed with rumors. People whispered of system glitches, class panels that flickered, anchors that didn't respond, monsters outside the city moving against their core patterns, dungeons refusing to collapse properly. The world was experiencing a lag spike, and no one knew why. Kael walked through the familiar streets with his hood down, cloak drifting at his sides. He didn't hide. Not anymore. But he wasn't here to fight. He was here to warn someone. He found Lyra near the training yard. She was leaning against a wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the new recruits as they sparred. Her armor looked more worn, her expression more guarded. When she saw him, her breath caught. She didn't smile, but she didn't draw her blade either. Kael. He nodded once. You're supposed to be dead. I've heard that before. She stared at him for a long moment, then walked over and shoved him, hard, in the shoulder. You vanished for days. The guild logged you as missing. Then the Enforcer Division locked down every access point to the West Cliffs. Kael said nothing. Lyra narrowed her eyes. What did you do? Kael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he held out his system panel. Not the floating interface, but his real panel, the one now fully integrated with override status. She saw it, saw the class tag, and her voice dropped to a whisper. Thread Walker. Kael nodded. I finished the trace chain. I reached the core. I rewrote what needed rewriting. She stepped back. You're not supposed to be able to do that. I wasn't. Kael's tone was quiet, steady, but now it's possible. Lyra looked past him, toward the city walls. You changed the system, but the world's still running on the old one. I know. You're going to break everything. Kael didn't blink. Only the things that shouldn't have lasted this long. Later, he sat beneath the old stone fountain near the western watchtower. The water had stopped flowing, another casualty of the system glitch. He didn't mind. His interface blinked once more. System note. Local region running outdated enforcement protocol. Status mismatch. Warning. Enforcer Subdivision, South Branch, has flagged your presence. Response window. 12 hours. Action level. Unknown. Kael closed the panel. The world hadn't caught up, but it would. And when it did, the enforcers wouldn't just come for him. They'd come for anyone who started remembering what it meant to choose. Kael leaned back against the stone and watched the city breathe. He had a plan now, not just survival, liberation, because if he could rewrite the system for himself, he could teach others to do the same. The city of South Branch was breathing raw. Kael could feel it now. Every system-linked stone, every stabilized structure, every guard badge, the magic that once pulsed through them was fading. The system was still running, but the rules had been rewritten, and the world hadn't noticed yet. Or worse, it had, and didn't know how to react. Kael walked the quiet edge of the market square, just past dusk, hood low, eyes scanning every flickering panel. Above the old guild hall, 3 error logs hovered like storm clouds. Class null. Anchor lost. Guild binding. Error. People passed beneath them, pretending not to notice, as if denial could delay collapse. That's when he heard it. A voice, young, shaking. It won't come back. I didn't erase it. I swear. Kael turned. Near the base of the east tower, a small group had gathered around a girl no older than 13. Short, sharp hair, dirty boots, tears running down her cheeks as a guild examiner held a glowing scroll up to her chest. The scroll was blank. Class none. Anchor. Not detected. System bond offline. She's anchor broken, someone muttered. No core. Not even a base tag. She's a hazard. Kael stepped closer. The examiner turned. Back off, traveler. We're handling it. But Kael ignored him. He walked through the crowd and knelt beside the girl. What's your name? He asked softly. She looked up, frightened. I don't know. Kael nodded slowly. Did you used to have a class? I think so. Do you remember how it made you feel? The girl blinked, then nodded. I felt bright, like I could move without asking for permission. Kael placed a hand over her system field. It flickered, unstable, but present. A raw system without a class. Unbound, unanchored, and exactly like he once was. He opened his panel. Override class, Threadwalker. Trait, core influence radius, level 1. Passive, legacy pulse, Nearby unbound users may align to rewritten system parameters. Effect. One potential Threadwalker candidate detected. Do you wish to initiate a guidance link? Kael didn't hesitate. He whispered yes. A soft light spread from his hand to hers. Not violent, not forced, just possibility. The girl's panel flickered again. This time, something changed. Class path, undefined. Anchor, unknown. Override compatible, yes. Do you wish to define your identity? She stared at the prompt, then looked at Kael. What does it mean? He smiled gently. It means you get to choose what kind of person you want to become, not what the system tells you to be. She hesitated, then reached out and pressed her hand to the prompt. The crowd stepped back as her interface reformed, lines of gold and gray swirling through the air around her. Not a class. Not yet. But a seed. Kael stood beside her, eyes narrowed as the system processed the connection. Then, first override user registered. New class path, to be forged. Identity tag. Chosen, level 1. Echo link established. Kael, first link. The girl looked up at him. I don't feel scared anymore. Kael's voice was quiet. Neither did I, once I remembered who I was. The guild examiner stepped forward, pale. What did you do? Kael turned to him. I showed her the part of the system you don't control anymore. The man stepped back like he'd been slapped. Kael looked at the others. She's not broken. She's the beginning. And with that, he turned and walked away, the girl's system light still glowing behind him. That night, across South Branch, a new kind of glitch spread. Users with fraying anchors. Wards that stopped responding. Class paths that no longer locked. And in one forgotten training yard, a quiet prompt appeared above a cracked stone. System notice. A new path has opened. Who do you want to become? The day after the girl's link activated, South Branch changed. It started with silence. No market bells. No class announcements. No echo of status panels updating in the square. Just stillness. Then the banners appeared, hung from the guild tower, posted on shop doors, projected in soft red across public interface hubs. Notice from the analyst faction. Unauthorized class activity has been detected. The system is currently undergoing protective recalibration. All unanchored users must report to Guild Hall for reclassification. Failure to comply will result in temporary lockdown. Kael stood in the shade of an old awning, watching the words flicker across the glowing banner above him. They weren't talking to everyone, just people like him. And now, people like her. The girl from the day before had already vanished. Her faint system glow gone from the edge of the training grounds. The override spark had taken hold. Too fast for the guild to understand, but not fast enough to outrun fear. They hadn't attacked yet, but they were preparing. Kael could feel it in the streets. People were watching their own panels more often. Guards moved in pairs now, eyes trained on anyone who didn't match a known signature. And worst of all, the analysts were here. Not enforcers, not soldiers, system auditors. The ones who rewrote definitions without needing permission. Kael followed the trail to the South Branch archives. The same building where he'd once researched his own anomalies. Now it had been locked down. Sigils burned at every door. And the archivist who once helped him? Gone. In her place stood a man in long, dark robes trimmed with copper coat. His eyes shimmered faintly beneath a visor that wasn't physical, just data scrolling across the air between him and the world. Kael stepped forward. The analyst looked up. Name? Kael. The man blinked once, then smiled, but it wasn't kind. The Threadwalker. Kael kept his tone flat. Didn't know that was public knowledge. The analyst tilted his head. Everything is public to us. Eventually, Kael said nothing. The man continued. You've altered the structure of at least one system-bound user. You've invoked core-level override commands. You've interfered with anchor assignment. Kael folded his arms. I've reminded people they're allowed to be more than what the system assigns. That, the analyst said, is exactly the problem. Kael's jaw tightened. Where's the girl? The analyst's expression didn't change. We don't imprison children, but we observe them. She's been flagged for behavioral mapping. The override tag is unstable. She's not unstable, Kael said quietly. She's unafraid. The analyst stepped closer. This system was designed to protect people from themselves. Override logic removes guardrails. People will burn. Kael stared into the scrolling visor. No, he said. They'll learn how to stand. A long silence passed. Then the analyst smiled again. "We'll be watching." He turned and walked back through the archive door, vanishing into light. That night, Kael sat on the roof of a half-abandoned barracks on the edge of the old district. His system was calm. No warnings. No combat alerts. But he felt the tension rising beneath the surface. The world hadn't rejected his change. It was adapting. Override trait detected. Active conflict state. Status. The system is building new countermeasures. Resistance level. Low, medium. New behavior logged. Override drift containment protocol. Purpose. Suppress growing anomalies by isolating unregistered users. Kael narrowed his eyes. The system had never needed soldiers. It only needed fear. Divide those who changed. Flag those who glitched. Turn unbound into dangerous. He thought of the girl again. Of others like her. Drifting. Remembering. Unsure whether to speak up or run. And he knew what had to come next. He couldn't just override. He had to build something. A path. A place. A way forward for those who didn't want to follow the old code anymore. He opened his interface and whispered a new command. Create override node. Prototype camp. Status. Decentralized. Type. Anchor-free training point. Location. Outside system detection grid. Confirm? Kael pressed yes. And far outside the edge of South Branch, in a forgotten stretch of trees, a spark ignited. A quiet place where the system couldn't reach. Yet, they came in small numbers. Not all at once. Not with banners or belief, but with questions and fear. It started 3 days after Kael lit the node. A soft pulse in the override field spread across the outer wilds, just strong enough to reach those whose systems had begun to flicker. A ripple through fractured anchors. A whisper across empty class tags. A call not built from command codes, but from choice. You're not broken. You are not forgotten. There is still a place to become who you are. The camp was nothing at first. Just an open grove surrounded by silent trees. A stone ring Kael had carved by hand, with marks from each of the 6 trace paths etched into its surface. It didn't glow. It didn't hum with power. It simply was a place not bound by system regulation. And that was enough. The first to arrive was a boy with no anchor. 15, maybe 16, covered in soot. His panel flashed, class drift detected, every few minutes. He couldn't hold any skill for more than a day. Kael sat with him under the old tree and taught him how to listen for the silence between echoes. The second was a woman who had never activated a class at all. Her parents had hidden her system for fear of drawing attention from a guild. She thought herself talentless. But when she stepped into the stone ring, her panel opened for the first time. Class. Unwritten. Override compatible. Yes. Identity. Ready to form. She cried for an hour before she said a word. And Kael said none. He only listened. Within a week, there were 6 of them. Too small to call a faction. Too fragile to call a rebellion. But real. Kael trained them not with drills, but with questions. What do you fear becoming? What part of yourself do you wish someone had seen? What would you protect, even without power? Their answers shaped their path. Not weapons, not titles, but threads of identity. And the system began to notice. Override node. Stabilizing. Users connected. 6. System alert. Anchorless activity detected. Suppression response. Delayed. Passive warning. Drift warning. You are building a pattern. Countermeasures expected. 2 to 4 days. Kael closed the panel and stood at the edge of the forest, watching the sky. They had time. Not much, but time. Enough to prepare the ones who would come next. And maybe one more. That night, just before the fire dimmed, someone arrived at the edge of the camp. Kael rose, hand near his blade, but the figure didn't move. No weapon drawn, no system light, just the soft pulse of a faint, flickering core, struggling to stay lit. A man stepped forward, older, scarred, eyes like someone who had survived a war the world never acknowledged. Kael's breath caught. He knew that face, not from memory, from one of the old trace echoes. The man had been in the background of Liran's final vision. A thread walker who never triggered his core. A silent one. The man looked at Kael and spoke only once. I heard you remembered. Kael nodded. The man smiled. Then maybe it's time we stopped pretending we were ever forgotten. He stepped into the firelight, and the camp grew to 7. The forest was quiet. Not empty, just listening. Kael stood in the center of the grove, watching 7 figures move through the early morning mist. No swords, no titles, just motion, breath, silence. There are no class tags above their heads, no floating symbols, no anchor icons, only presence. The override camp was real now. Half a ring of carved stones marked its border. Crude tents and handmade training markers scattered between roots and moss-covered logs. The system couldn't see this place. Not directly, but it was watching anyway. Kael knew, because the air felt tense, as if the code beneath the surface was bracing for something. Override node. Stable. Connected users. 7. Drift alignment. Active. System alert. Anchorless cluster formation. Estimated response window. 48 hours. Warning. New behavior logged in adjacent region. Classification. Unknown user type. Potential status. Reverse classed. Kael closed the panel. He wasn't sure what that meant yet, but he'd find out. That morning, he called the camp together for the first time. They gathered in the stone ring, some curious, others cautious. Kael spoke without command, without power, just truth. You weren't chosen by the system, he said. You weren't handed a script to follow. You weren't ranked. You weren't bound. You were left behind. No one spoke. He continued. And that means this is the first time in your life you get to decide who you are. He pointed to the ring beneath them. Here, we don't train for damage, or for level, or to match a title. We train to remember. One of the boys, Rill, the anchor-broken scout, raised his hand. Remember what? Kael looked at him. Why you're still alive. They train without status boosts. No experience gains. No quests. Just learning. Kael taught them, fracture step, in parts, how to move through intention, not prediction, how to read the space between thoughts. He taught them how to channel anchorless energy without shattering, how to hold onto an idea of themselves when no skill tree would define them. And slowly, something took shape. Override trait development. Passive link established. First cohort tag. Drifters. Subclass unlocked. Identity bound. Variant tree. Classification. User defined. Rill. Scout no name. First movement tag acquired. Mira. Unwritten. Emotion-bound light mark detected. Override structure evolving. Kael read the panel and smiled. They weren't soldiers. Not yet. But they were threads, and they were starting to weave. That evening, the scar man from the last episode, Tane, approached Kael by the fire. I remember your voice, he said. Kael glanced up. From when? Tane looked into the flames. Back before the system was quiet, when the trace was still breaking people. I heard you speak once. From a sealed memory node. You were already unraveling. I thought you were a ghost. Kael didn't smile. I might have been. You're not now. A pause. Then Tane said, I think I know what that reverse class alert means. Kael sat straighter. Tell me. Tane leaned closer. When a user breaks too many rules and the system can't reset them, it tries to mirror them. Create something opposite. Something it can still control. Kael's eyes narrowed. A reflection. A correction. Built from collapse. Not memory. Tane's voice dropped. I think it made someone like you. But twisted. Later that night, Kael stepped into the woods alone. And from far beyond the range of the override node, a system alert rippled through the darkness. Reverse class signature detected. User tag. Unknown. Status. Hostile evolution. Origin. Broken anchor chain. Direction. Moving toward override node. Time to contact. 36 hours. Kael closed his eyes. Someone was coming. Someone who had been forced to evolve. Not with freedom, but with rage. The wind changed overnight. It didn't come from the mountains. It came from the east. A pressure. Slow and heavy. Like a breath held too long. Now returning with force. Kael stood at the edge of the override camp, watching the tree line as the first rays of light crept across the moss-covered grove. System notice. Reverse class user approaching. Estimated distance. 4.6 kilometers. Identity. Unknown. Status. Unstable. Directive. Terminate or suppress override activity. Threat level. Red. The system didn't offer choices this time. Only outcomes. Kael didn't flinch. Behind him, 7 people stirred. Not fighters. Not yet. But ready. He gathered the drifters before sunrise. No dramatic orders. No declarations of war. Just truth. Someone's coming, Kael said. Not a monster. Not a guild assassin. Not an enforcer. He paused. Someone like us. But twisted by a system that didn't know how to erase them. Rill asked the question everyone else was thinking. Can we beat them? Kael didn't lie. I don't know. Silence. Then Mira stepped forward, still anchorless, still untagged, but her system shimmered with faint light. Then we hold the line until we can. The camp changed that day. Not in power, but in resolve. They set watchers in the trees. Not to fight, to feel. Override users could sense the static shift of classless energy like Kael once had. They moved without system help, mapping their instincts to memory. They shaped the training ground into rings. Personal zones where each could define their presence. Not territory. Identity. Kael stood at the center and drew a line in the dirt with his boot. You are not here to stop the world, he said. You are here to remind it that people still have the right to choose. Night fell, and the system pulsed with a final warning. Reverse class user within range. Class signature. Reflected chaos. LV. Type. Unstable. Mirrored host. Notes. User exhibits traits of past override interactions. Class traits detected. Burned anchor core. Force fracture step. Echo loop corruption. Status. Approaching camp. Kael's breath slowed. He could feel it now. A presence. Not physical. Not magical. System bent. Like a hole in the world where a person used to be. Tane stood beside him, gripping the hilt of a dull, untagged blade. She's not coming to talk, he said. Kael nodded once. No. He looked at the drifters. They need to see if we break. Then he stepped forward, toward the woods, and met her at the line. She looked 19, but her system signature was older, weathered and full of holes. Her skin shimmered with unfinished data. Her class tag flickered between fragments. Class, reflected chaos. Origin, unknown. Core status, corrupted threadwalker. Directive, erase the loop breaker. Her eyes met Kael's, and she spoke only one word. What? Kael tilted his head. Why what? She didn't blink. Why do you still exist? Then she attacked. Kael moved. She was fast. Fracture step merged with glitch teleportation. A broken form of what Kael had once learned from Alan and Liran. But she didn't move like herself. She moved like echoes stitched together. He countered with thread pulse, briefly destabilizing the terrain. She crashed to the ground, only to roll through the impact like she expected to fail. Her form twisted midair, reshaping into an echo of Kael's own stance. His own blade arc. She was copying, but not learning, just replaying his worst fragments. Kael struck once, clean, fast, straight to the shoulder. The blow landed. Her system recoiled, not in pain, in confusion. I can't overwrite you, she whispered. No, Kael said, stepping closer. Because I'm not an error anymore. The fight stopped before death. She felt her knees, not bleeding, just breaking. Her class signature cracked again. Reflected chaos. Degradation at 82%. System rewrite. Incomplete. Core instability. Critical. Kael knelt beside her and offered his hand. You weren't supposed to become this, he said. She looked at him, trembling. What was I supposed to be? Kael's voice was soft. Someone who got a second chance. He opened his panel. Do you wish to absorb echo fragment? Corrupted override? Result. Stabilize user. Purge reflective state. Restore core identity. Kael accepted. A pulse rippled through the grove. And for the first time since the system rewrote itself, a reverse class user was healed. She didn't speak after that. Not for hours. But she stayed. And the camp grew to aid. The system trembled the moment she was saved. Not in the sky, not in the earth, but in the invisible web of law and logic that held the world together. When Kael absorbed the corrupted echo and restored her core, the code beneath the surface shifted. Not because it wanted to, because it didn't know what to do. No one had ever saved a reverse class user before. And the system? It had no protocol for forgiveness. System alert. Override class user has broken containment logic. Echo fragment. Restored. Reverse class tag. Removed. Core identity. Reinitialized. Violation of rule A1 detected. Response level. Escalated to global. Analyst faction directive. Rewrite override law. In progress. Kael stood alone at the edge of the grove. The girl, Era, she said her name was Now, slept in the tent behind him. Her breathing was steady, her panel dimmed, no longer flickering with glitch code. But the ripple she left behind wasn't fading. Kael could feel in the air. Every system-tied object nearby, his old blade, the training markers, even the tracking stones the guild once used, flickered. Unstable. Not because they were breaking, because the rules that defined them were. Behind him, the rest of the camp was silent. Training had stopped for the day. Not from fear, from awe. Because what Kael did for Era had proven something none of them dare believe. They weren't alone. Even the broken could be brought back. Even the corrupted could choose again. That night, the override panel changed. Kael opened his system beneath the trees, expecting status logs, quiet updates, threat proximity. Instead, he found something new. Alert. System emergency update. A new law is being written. Class. Override. To be defined as anomaly. Status. Recognized threat to user hierarchy. Proposed law. No system-defined user may interact with or be influenced by an override class individual without analyst authorization. Time to lock in. 47 hours. Do you wish to challenge this law? Kael's eyes narrowed. They weren't sending enforcers this time. They were rewriting the world around him. And if the law passed, it would mean every user, even the ones Kael saved, would be cut off. They'd forget. Their panels would reject, override influence. Their anchors would be forcibly reapplied. And Era would fall again. Kael stood and whispered to the night. Then I'll rewrite it first. He didn't sleep. Instead, he walked to the oldest stone in the ring, the one carved from the beginning of the trace chain. He pressed his palm against it and let the 6 echoes return, not as fragments, but as foundations. Alan's blade, Liran's step, Ressa's scream, the Kael who looped, the silence that chose to disappear. And now, Era, the redeemed. Thread reintegration. Active. Core title, The One Who Remembers. New option unlocked. Law rebuttal, prototype mode. Do you wish to submit a counterlaw? Kael didn't hesitate. Begin rebuttal draft. The words formed slowly, one at a time. He didn't write with commands. He wrote with memory. Law proposal. Replacement clause for A1. Let those who break the rules be given the chance to choose new ones. Let memory not define guilt, but direction. Let identity evolve. Not as error, but as potential. The system pulsed. A challenge had been logged. Law rebuttal. Active. Voting window. 47 hours. Result will decide whether override will be erased from system logic or become a recognized class path. Kael exhaled and stepped back. He'd done what he could. Now, it was time to prepare. Because if the system couldn't erase him by force, it would rewrite the world to make sure no one ever followed. 47 hours. That's how long the system gave them. Not to fight, not to run, but to decide. Kael watched the sky as the first clock appeared, burned across the system network in every major city, every guild square, every dungeon hall. Warning system, notice warning. Law update pending. Override class status, to be defined. Proposed law, restrict influence of override users. Rebuttal, law A, 1 replacement proposal, open choice logic. Time until resolution. 46 hours, 57 minutes, and 42 seconds. Voting authorized for. Guild high rank. Enforcer command. Anchor council. Analyst faction. Class architect lineage. System root observer. Override influence. Locked pending vote outcome. Kael closed the prompt. He knew what it meant. The system had opened the decision to the core powers of the world. But not the users. Not the drifters. Not the anchorless. Not the ones who'd lived under the old laws, bent by rules they never chose. Only the architects of those rules could vote, and none of them had ever wanted to be questioned. Kael returned to the camp. The others had seen the sky. They didn't ask what it meant. They already knew. Mira stood beside the fire, her hands clenched. So what now? Do we wait for them to vote us out of existence? Kael looked around the ring. We don't wait. We speak. To who? To everyone who's still pretending they don't know the truth. They moved fast. Tane took 3 of the drifters to a system-linked outpost in the western marshlands, where half-anchored classes still flickered with error tags. Rill and Mira traveled to an old scout guild settlement where override glitches had already started spreading. And Kael? He went back to the place he thought he'd never return to. South Branch. It was already different. The banners in the square now glowed red. The guild was quiet, but full. Leaders had gathered. Analysts posted on every corner. Users stood in long lines, waiting to confirm their class statuses hadn't shifted. Many of them looked afraid. Not of Kael, of change. He stepped through the main gates. And once again, the room fell silent. An older man approached, the council anchor of South Branch, his robes layered with glowing chains, his panel radiant with a rank few could achieve. "You don't belong here," the man said. "You are not recognized." Kael didn't raise his voice. "I'm not here to ask for recognition." "Then why are you here?" Kael looked him in the eye. "To remind you that everyone you speak for was never asked if they agreed." The crowd began to gather. Users, watchers, low-tier class holders, vendors, apprentices, people who'd never had power, but who had always been bound by it. Kael stepped onto the old mission platform and let his panel open wide. No weapon drawn, no threat offered, just the truth, spoken into the system's silence. "I was built to be erased. I've lived lives that loop back on themselves. I've followed 6 traces, rewritten my identity more times than I remember. But every time I reach the edge of the world, the system pulled me back, not to protect me, to reset me. People stopped walking, stopped working, stopped pretending." Kael's voice was steady. "I broke the loop, not with force, with choice. And now the system wants to write a law that says no one like me should be allowed to influence anyone again." He stepped forward. "I'm not here to win a war. I'm here to ask a question the system never has." He raised his voice. "Who do you want to become?" System prompt. Echo pulse message registered. Override influence ripple created. Nearby users affected. 12. Memory alignment flicker. 3 confirmed. Trace potential. Waking. Kael closed the panel. He'd done what he could. The vote would still come. But now, people were listening. And the system was starting to realize that not all power comes from control. Far away, inside the sealed system root node, 6 figures stood in a ring of crystallized data. Each one bore a class that had never been seen by the public. They weren't enforcers. They weren't guild masters. They were the ones who wrote the code beneath the code. And they were now reading the first law ever proposed by someone they didn't authorize. One of them spoke. "If we let this pass, the system won't guide them anymore." Another replied, "Maybe that's what they've needed all along." The sky didn't move. Not because it was calm, because the world was watching. The countdown had reached its final hour. From the eastern guild spires to the desert obelisks of the Outwalker clans, from sealed enforcer towers to underground class sanctuaries, every system-linked user saw the same glowing prompt. Warning, final notice warning. Override law rebuttal. Voting complete in 1 hour. Current law. A1. Override class users to be isolated and contained. Proposed rebuttal. Let those who break the rules choose new ones. Decision authority. Guild High Command. Enforcer Division. Anchor Council. Analyst Faction. Architect Lineage. Root Observers. Voting outcome. Pending. No combat. No conflict. Just silence. The kind of silence that only comes before a world either rises or resets. Kael sat at the center of the override camp. Not speaking. Not training. Just still. He didn't look at his panel. Didn't count the time. He'd already said what needed to be said. Around him, the drifters waited too. Rill traced a circle in the dirt with the tip of a broken training knife. Mira held her system open, the faint outline of subclass she'd named herself flickering across her palm. Lightbound. Identity. Hope. Era stood with her arms crossed, no longer glitching. Her reverse class tag had been fully cleared. In its place was a single word that shimmered faintly across her interface. Class. Rewritten. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about everyone. In the heart of South Branch, thousands had gathered around the guild square, where the vote timer now hovered above the central interface obelisk. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Did you hear what he said? They say he faced the enforcers alone. My system's been flickering ever since. Can he really change the law?" No one answered, because no one knew. And then, 5 seconds. For seconds. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. Vote closed. For 10 full seconds, nothing happened. Then the system spoke. Not in a voice, but across everything. Global announcement. System law update passed. The override rebuttal has been ratified. Override class users are now recognized as valid paths. Anchor assignment. Optional. Class identity. May evolve outside assigned tree. New system directive. Identity assignment. The right to choose is now protected. The message spread like wildfire. All across the world, system panels blinked. Class trees flickered. Old restrictions gone. Users once marked as broken, anchorless, or unclassed found their panels stabilizing, not with a pre-written path, but with a new prompt. Who do you want to become? In the override camp, Kael opened his system. His class panel had changed. Override class, True Threadwalker. Title, The One Who Was Remembered. Legacy Law. Enacted. Current Influence. Global. Status. You are no longer the exception. You are the beginning. That night, the drifters built a second fire ring beside the first. Not to replace it. To mark the day the world changed. Tane carved the first line into the new stone. The system didn't forget us. It just finally remembered how to listen. Far away, inside the sealed root node, the 6 observers stood in silence. The vote had passed by 1 margin. Not from the analysts, not from the guilds, but from the architect lineage, the original builders of the class system. The oldest among them had whispered only one thing before casting her vote. He finally did it, and for the first time in system history, they chose not to reverse it. It started with silence. Not fear, not shock, but the quiet hum of realization. The system law had passed. Override class was no longer forbidden. Anchors became optional. And for the first time in recorded system history, choice had become a mechanic. Across the continent, a new prompt appeared in user panels, quiet and clean, like a breath waiting to be taken. Class path, not locked. Anchor, not assigned. Do you wish to define yourself? Kael sat beneath the oldest tree in the override camp. He hadn't moved since the law passed. His panel remained open, the golden threads of the trace chain now fully visible, etched into his class window like roots carved in light. Override class, Threadwalker. Legacy ascended. Current influence, global, open drift. Core status, recognized. Authority, passive alignment field active. Users within range, 412. The number stunned him. He hadn't taught anyone else. He hadn't left the camp since the vote. And yet, hundreds had already started drifting. Some were former warriors, now searching for meaning without a weapon. Others were rejected casters, whose spells had faded as the system realigned. Even a few reverse-class users had begun to stabilize without him. The truth was simple. Kael wasn't the spark anymore. He was the fire that needed to shape it. Tane approached just past sunrise. There's a problem, he said. Kael didn't turn. Where? South of the ridge. Border village. Users there just went fully anchorless overnight. No classes. No core. No fallback script. Kael's jaw tightened. System failure? No. System withdrawal. They chose to unbind. Kael looked up now. And Tane hesitated. They're hurting people. Stealing. No structure. Just power and instinct. Kael stood slowly. The system gave them choice. Tane nodded. But it didn't teach them how to use it. They arrived at dusk. The village was a quiet ring of stone and dust, built into the slope of the southern cliffs. Houses stood unburned. No monsters stalked the edges. But the people, they were different. Eyes wild. Panels unstable. Some had fused fragments of old class lines. Warrior traits meshed with thief scripts. Others had looped into raw, override fields with no structure at all. Kael stepped into the square, and the nearest user lunged at him. Wild, untrained, energy pulsing in every direction. He didn't strike. He raised a hand. Passive triggered. Thread pulse. Stabilize field. Target user. Echo flickering. Condition. Core chaos. Override drift without anchor. Result. Sync pulse sent. The attacker staggered. Fell to one knee. His panel flickered, then dimmed. Kael knelt beside him. You unbound yourself, he said. The man coughed. Didn't want to be anyone's. You aren't, Kael said softly. But if you destroy others in the name of freedom, you become the thing that bound you. System notice. New user behavior detected. Classification. Rogue override. Threat level. Moderate. Guidance path unassigned. Advisory. Begin order formation. Kael stared at the prompt. A choice was being offered to him again. The system had accepted freedom. Now it needed something else. A guide. That night, Kael stood beneath the stars and opened his panel. He'd never wanted followers. Never wanted a lead. But if the world was going to choose, it needed people who remembered what that really meant. New Threadwalker option unlocked. Override order formation. Prototype tier. Role. Guide of the drift. Do you accept? Kael pressed yes. And the moment he did, a new title appeared on his interface. Order of the Chosen Drift. Founder. Kael. Alignment field created. Override compatible users may now connect. First role created. Pathmaker. In the far corners of the world, lone users felt a shift in the system. A question appeared in the corner of their vision. Faint. Soft. A path has opened. Do you wish to walk it? The system no longer dictated roles. Now, it waited for people to define them. And slowly, they began to answer. Not with fanfare, not with titles or ceremonies, but with quiet steps. Drifters, anchorless users, failed class holders, reverse survivors. They came through forests and mountain trails, old dungeon paths and guild border zones. Some walked alone, others arrived in pairs, still unsure if what they'd found was real. But all of them came for one reason. They had no place left in the old world. Kael watched them from the edge of the camp. His panel shimmered with a new interface, subtle, woven like a tapestry across his core. System update. Override order. Active. Founder. Kael. Pathmaker tier. Initiated. Roles created. 1. Pathmaker. Status. Mentorship enabled. Connected users. 23. Alignment field. Stable. They weren't a guild. They weren't a rebellion. They were simply the first wave. The ones who heard the call and said, I don't know who I am, but I want to find out. Kael called them to the ring that night. A new circle had been carved beside the tray stones. Smaller, more open. Designed not to teach how to fight, but how to walk forward without a system telling you where to step. He didn't give them ranks. He gave them questions. What is your name now that no one gives it to you? What's the one truth you've never been allowed to speak? If you could hold a class that had no power, but reflected your heart, what would it be called? Some answered aloud. Others wrote their answers into their panels. And as they did, the system responded. Override drift accepted. Identity path manifesting. User, Thera. Class, memory binder, pathmaker variant. Trait, carries emotional fragments of others to stabilize system chaos. User, Fen. Class, Dustrider, pathmaker variant. Trait, travels across override fields, mapping lost users for recovery. Kael's eyes widened. He hadn't made these classes. They were forming themselves. The law had passed. The system had rewritten its route. And now, the world was writing itself. Tane stood beside Kael, arms crossed, eyes on the new arrivals as they found places to sleep, train, or simply sit in quiet. You started something, he said. Kael nodded. I didn't want to lead it. You're not, Tane said. You're guiding it. That's different. But not everyone was watching in silence. Far away, deep beneath the surface of an ancient collapsed archive node, a sealed system thread trembled. The law update had reached even there, and something that had once been a person, now buried in static. Woke up. Legacy core accessed. Suppressed user. Refracted path. Class. Shadow of order. Type. User fragment. Preserve in loop. Status. Rejecting override. Trigger response. Phase pulse. Objective. Restore the old code. A black field flared within the hidden system ruins. Not in rage. Not in revenge. But in certainty. Because for every world that gains freedom, there will always be those who believe only chains hold things together. Back in the camp, Kael opened a new prompt. Override order. Roles available, too. Create new role? He thought for a moment. Then, tapped the panel. Role created. Echo Seeker. Purpose. Recover lost threads and guide corrupted users toward choice. Mira was the first to accept. Rill followed. The camp lights flickered against the rising wind. And in the dark, a shadow had started walking. Beneath the earth, The system pulsed with cold clarity. No wind, no light, just stone, silence, and code buried too deep for any surface scan to touch. System status, error. Archive node, fracture omega. User file, refracted path, suspended. Override law, detected. Response, legacy lock breach. User awakening, in progress. The being stirred. It didn't open eyes. It didn't breathe. But it remembered. Override was never meant to survive. Override was an accident, a glitch, a mercy mistaken for meaning. And now the system, its beloved structure, its guiding code, had voted. It had chosen to remember Kael, to accept him. And that meant only one thing. The system was broken beyond repair. The being stood, its form half-faded, wrapped in reflective code patterns that mirrored every failed class it had once carried. Its name no longer registered in the system, but the fragments remembered it. User recognized. Former name, Sarenval. Former class, Architect Line, Rulecrafter. Cause of death, Core Loop Lock. Final directive, maintain order. The shadows obeyed her, and, as she stepped into the system light for the first time in centuries, a class returned with her. Class, Shadow of Order. Type, Restorative Enforcer. Trait, absorbs override users to purge law deviation. Objective, re-establish absolute control. Kael didn't know she existed. Not yet. But he felt something. A tremor that wasn't system-related. A silence that didn't belong to night. He stood at the edge of the Pathmaker camp, watching the lights flicker in the grove as new arrivals trickled in. 36 users now. More by dusk. Each with a class of their own making. Some fragile. Some strange. All real. And all born from the single law he had fought to rewrite. Override order. Stable. Connected users. 36. Global status. System drift widening. Unknown core activity detected. Directional pulse. Underground. Southern arc. Kael narrowed his eyes. He didn't recognize the signature. But the intent. He knew it immediately. Someone, or something, was waking up with the sole purpose of putting the world back in chains. The next day, the first report came in. A scout pathmaker, named Ren, returned from a fringe village with his cloak scorched and his system flickering. They were gone, he said. Who? Kael asked. Everyone. All override users. They'd chosen drift status. Started forming their own ring. And Ren looked up slowly. There was no fight. Just silence. Like they'd vanished mid-thought. Kael opened Ren's panel. The logs were distorted. Wiped. Memory field. Partial. Trace echo. Fragmented. System anchor field. Overridden by unrecognized class. Status. Absorbed. Not killed. Not corrupted. Absorbed. Myra's hand tightened around her weapon. Do you think it's the system retaliating again? Kael shook his head. No. This isn't the system trying to stop us. He looked toward the southern range. This is something that thinks it is the system. Far below, Sarenval walked through another forgotten archive, data flickering across her arms in slow spirals. Users drifted nearby. She didn't strike. She simply touched their core threads and erased them, not from life, but from freedom. User status, rewritten to obedience tier. Core anchor, restored. Identity, locked. Override influence, removed. Back in the Pathmaker camp, Kael gathered his leadership circle, Tane, Mira, Rill, and the first 5 Echo Seekers. He showed them the logs, showed them what was coming. She's absorbing them, Mira said, turning override users back into system-bound identities. Worse, Kael said, she's rewriting them to forget they ever chose something else. The firelight crackled low. Kael stared into it for a long time, then opened his panel. Override order. Emergency protocol. Role creation unlocked. New role, Threadguard. Purpose, protect free users from class reabsorption. Effect, enables field resistance to forced rewrites. The panel shimmered. Mira accepted first, then Tane, then the rest. System alert. 2 forces have emerged. Override order. User-led identity paths. Shadow of order. System fragment seeking restoration. Conflict classification, inbound. Far below, Saren opened her panel and stared at Kael's name. Threadwalker, she whispered. Let's see how many of your chosen I can bring back to the old code. before you realize freedom isn't a gift.